Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Charlotte Mulhall. In March 2005, a gruesome murder occurred in Ireland when a fisherman made a disturbing discovery in a canal. He initially thought he had found a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was part of a human leg wearing a sock. He immediately contacted the police. The subsequent investigation revealed many details about this infamous case. The Mulhall family lived in South Dublin, Ireland, consisting of parents John and Kathleen and their 6 children, 3 daughters and 3 sons. The family faced challenges related to alcohol and substance abuse. Both parents drank regularly, and their arguments often became loud and violent, all in front of the children, despite their troubled marriage. John and Kathleen remained together for 27 years. However, by the early 2000s, when their children were grown, they decided to divorce due to financial issues, but continued to live together. At first, it seemed that family life was getting better. However, in 2002, Kathleen introduced her new boyfriend, Farah Swala Noor, who was 14 years her junior. Kathleen's ex-husband, John, felt uncomfortable having a stranger in his home, especially since Farah was now sharing a bed with Kathleen. In response, John decided to leave and move in with his girlfriend. Unfortunately, his new partner soon kicked him out of the house, and he spent a year wandering around Dublin before returning home. Luckily for John, by that time, Kathleen and Farah had moved into a rented flat in another area of Dublin. Farah arrived in Ireland in December 1996 under the false name Shalila Salim. He claimed to be from Somalia and said that his entire family had died in the Civil War. In fact, he was from Kenya and his family still lived there. Farah had a record of minor crimes, and when his deception was discovered, he faced deportation. He successfully appealed the decision. In March 1999, he married a Dublin resident, and they had a child together, which enabled him to obtain Irish citizenship after naturalization. Farah left his wife and began living a chaotic life, relying on odd jobs and petty theft to make ends meet. Farah had a violent past, including an incident in which he abused a mentally disabled Chinese woman, although she bore him a son. Farah escaped punishment for his actions. Reports suggest he harbored a deep hatred for women. In 2002, Farah met Kathleen, and they began a tumultuous relationship. Both were unemployed and relied on odd jobs to make ends meet. Their shared love of alcohol initially bonded them, but over time, their difficult personalities led to frequent arguments, which Kathleen's children often witnessed. Kathleen's eldest daughter, Linda, was born in 1975. She dropped out of school at a young age. By the age of 24, she had 4 children and often forgot the names of her boyfriends due to a series of short-lived relationships. Linda also served a short prison sentence for theft and struggled with alcohol and drug addiction. Linda's younger sister, Charlotte, had her own legal troubles, with around 7 convictions for theft, property damage, escort services, and other misdemeanors. Like Linda, Charlotte also struggled with serious addiction issues. The other siblings also had their own legal problems, and none were considered positive role models. On Sunday, March 20, 2005, Linda invited Charlotte to her apartment. While they were talking in the kitchen, Charlotte suggested that they start celebrating her birthday, which was the next day. At first, Linda refused because she had been abstaining from alcohol for 3 weeks to regain custody of her children, who were in a shelter. However, the temptation to drink became too strong, and half an hour later, they opened a bottle of hard liquor to start the birthday celebration. A few hours later, the sisters decided to visit their mother and her partner, Farah. When they called their mother, they found out that Kathleen and Farah were at a bar in central Dublin. Without hesitation, the sisters joined them. It turned out that Kathleen and Farah had been celebrating St. Patrick's Day for 4 consecutive days. After meeting Linda and Charlotte at the bar, the family did not stay long and decided to continue celebrating at a nearby park. However, Farah got into an argument with some locals, forcing the family to stay out of trouble and decide to go home. The four of them returned to Kathleen and Farah's rented apartment. They prepared food and set the table to celebrate Charlotte's upcoming birthday. When everything was ready, Farah fell asleep to lift Farah's spirits. Kathleen slipped a pill into his drink. Although the ecstasy worked, things did not go as they had expected. A moment later, Linda, who was sitting on the sofa, suddenly felt Farah caress and squeeze her legs. Then he put his arm around her waist and whispered inappropriate words into her ear. At first, Linda did not want to cause a scandal, so she reminded Farah to behave after witnessing Farah's inappropriate actions. Linda openly asked him to take his hands off her, realizing that the situation was escalating. Kathleen and Charlotte began to insult Farah and asked him to behave properly. The argument quickly turned into a fight. Then, Farah grabbed Kathleen, causing her to scream for help to her daughters. In response, Charlotte pulled a knife from her pocket and attacked Farah, seeing her sister Charlotte in danger. Linda rushed to the pantry and grabbed a large iron hammer under the influence of alcohol. Linda lost control of her actions. Soon, the floors, walls, and rooms were in chaos. Meanwhile, the girl's mother, Kathleen, sat in a chair, holding a glass and watching her two daughters attack Farah. Eventually, she grew tired of the commotion and turned her attention to the television, where an entertainment program was playing. After the altercation, the sisters began to understand what had happened, and panic set in. Kathleen stepped in to help and gave Linda and Charlotte a plan for how to dispose of Farah's body. Kathleen said that no one would charge them with murder if Farah's body was not found. So Linda and Charlotte spent the next 5 hours in the bathroom processing the body. During this time, Kathleen took a nap. When Kathleen woke up, she found 7 black plastic bags in the hallway. She called her ex-husband John to tell him about the nightmare that had unfolded in their rented apartment. John was skeptical and did not believe her at first. However, when he arrived and saw the scene from the front door, he realized it was no joke. He declared that he would not participate and went home. After a short break, Kathleen and her 2 daughters began a thorough cleaning of the apartment. They used brooms and several gallons of bleach to meticulously wipe down every surface. At noon on March 21, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte left the rented apartment, each carrying a sports bag containing black trash bags. They walked to the nearest river channel and, unnoticed, threw 6 black bags into the water. The women then went to a restaurant. Afterward, they took a bus for about an hour to the city center. Once there, they stopped at a large store, browsed several areas, withdrew money from an ATM, and went to a park. In the park, they dug a shallow hole with a knife and buried the last bag. They eventually threw the knife and hammer into a nearby pond before returning home. Over the next few days, Kathleen and her daughters focused on cleaning the rental apartment. Kathleen bought a large amount of cleaning supplies. She later admitted that there was a terrible, nauseating smell in the room that no cleaning product could remove. Kathleen and Charlotte coped with the smell by drinking and using drugs to forget it. However, Linda was very distressed, crying constantly and unable to calm down. 10 days later, one of the bags that Kathleen and her daughters had thrown into the Dublin Canal floated to the surface. A local fisherman discovered it and quickly called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they drained the canal, and divers searched the area, eventually finding 6 black bags containing the man's body. A forensic expert determined that the man had suffered 28 injuries due to the brutal nature of the case. The police initially speculated that he may have died during a witchcraft ritual, but later ruled this theory out after consulting with experts. The police knew they needed to solve the case by identifying the victim. However, the DNA database did not have any matches for the body. Therefore, officers decided to take a different approach. They shared descriptions and photos of the items found in the victim's bag through social media. Among these items, was a torn T-shirt with the logo of an Irish football club. This shirt helped identify the victim as Farah Swaleh Noor. As one of his old friends from Somalia recognized it, this friend also mentioned that Farah had been missing for several weeks and had stopped answering calls. Police discovered that Farah had been living with a girlfriend named Kathleen Mulhall for the past few years. This information prompted further investigation. Samolit received a cash reward for helping to locate Kathleen, while two others, Linda and Charlotte, were brought in for questioning. All three denied any involvement, and the police had no evidence to charge the women. So they were released the same day. In July 2005, one of Kathleen's sons, who was serving time in prison for a traffic violation, informed a guard that his mother and sisters had killed Farah. He claimed that during a prison visit, Kathleen had confessed to the crime to him. Following this revelation, the police searched Kathleen's apartment and discovered traces of Farah's blood. In August 2005, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte were again questioned at the police station. They maintained their innocence, and the interrogation lasted 12 hours. Kathleen and her two daughters, Linda and Charlotte, were then released. During this time, Linda, who was extremely remorseful, called the police at the end of August and confessed to the crime, leading them to the park where they had buried a black bag that eventually contained Farah's body. However, it is believed that the black bag was unearthed and moved to another location shortly after Linda's confession. In September 2005, Kathleen Mulhall fled to England. In December 2005, Linda and Charlotte were arrested and charged with murder. Shortly afterward, their biological father, John, who was looking after the four children on his own, died. It is believed that he had nothing to do with the crime. Linda and Charlotte's trial began in October 2006, with Linda facing a charge of manslaughter and Charlotte charged with attempted murder. During the trial, both women claimed they acted in self-defense, maintained their innocence, and stated that they were trying to protect their mother. After a brief deliberation, the jury found Charlotte Mulhall and Linda Mulhall guilty. The judge sentenced Linda to 15 years in prison, while Charlotte received a life sentence. It was reported that both sisters had exhibited poor behavior while incarcerated in a women's prison in Dublin. One day, Linda injured her hand and spent several weeks in the hospital. Charlotte attracted media attention after a photograph was released of Charlotte attacking a male prisoner. The incident led to increased security measures at all prisons in Ireland, and Charlotte was subsequently transferred to a higher security facility in Limerick. Kathleen Mulhall's story began when she fled Ireland in September 2005 and assumed a new identity in the UK. However, in January 2008, a reporter discovered her location and reported her to the police. As a result, Kathleen was forced to return to Ireland, where she faced numerous charges. She confessed to helping her daughters dispose of their bodies and clean their apartment. In May 2009, Kathleen was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released after serving only 2 years. After her release in October 2011, she returned to the UK and moved in with her son, James. At that time, James's family consisted of his 6 children and the 4 children of his sister, Linda. He adopted Linda's children after she was arrested. After Kathleen arrived, tensions rose between James and his live-in girlfriend, eventually leading to an incident in which he assaulted her and was subsequently imprisoned. Kathleen later suffered severe kidney failure and underwent an organ transplant in Dublin. She now lives in her hometown, where she continues to receive treatment. Linda was released early from her sentence that same year. She now lives with her children and her new partner. Linda does not give interviews to journalists. In a recent statement to the media, she said, "She have served my sentence. Let she live in peace after all. This is she personal life, and it is none of your." Since March 2023, Charlotte has been allowed to leave prison for 1 day. Under close supervision by guards, she may soon be eligible for parole. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Lillelid family. Vidar Lillelid was from Bergen, Norway. At just 20 years old, he decided to Florida, USA, to pursue his dreams. As the youngest of 4 children, he had always been a modest homebody, filled with positivity and aspirations of having a wife, children, and a bright future. In February 1989, Vidar married Delfina Zelaya, an American of Honduran descent, whom he met through their mutual involvement in Jehovah's Witnesses. Then, they decided to move to Miami. In 1990, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Tabitha. However, they soon realized they wanted a quieter life away from the hustle and bustle of Miami, forcing them to seek a more peaceful place to raise their children. Vidar and Delfina found a home on the outskirts of Knoxville, in a suburb called Powell. This typical American suburb offered tranquility, beautiful natural scenery, and a tight-knit community. The young couple was warmly received by the locals, and it felt like their search for a better living environment had finally come to an end, allowing them to enjoy a serene life. In 1995, Vidar and Delfina welcomed their son, Peter. As time passed, they decided to move to a larger home where each family member could have their own room. In 1996, they found the house that was built 50 years earlier, known for its remarkable architectural design, located in the suburbs. Upon moving in, the family quickly began planning for the future. Their first priority was to renovate the old house extensively and build several outbuildings. The couple eagerly started the renovations house, focusing on the guest house. Although the young family was not wealthy and chose the house for its affordability, they were aware of the significant work ahead and were motivated to tackle the difficulty together. Friends and relatives remembered Vidar and Delfina was enthusiastic people, attached to their faith, family, and aspirations. They worked diligently, with Delfina employed at a local restaurant and dedicating her free time to her family. The couple was very religious, and in April 1997, their local congregation organized a special event in a neighboring state for those interested in deepening their faith and learning effective practices. On April 6, 1997, the final day of the meetings, the congregation invited the family to dinner. However, Vidar and Delfina were want to get home because didn't have enough money for the meal. They had already spent most of their savings on the trip and new clothes for the convention. The young couple, along with their children, thanked the congregation for the invitation but chose to celebrate in a smaller setting instead. To commemorate the occasion, Vidar and Delfina planned a picnic on their way back to create a festive atmosphere for the children. They began their journey, but during the drive, their son, Peter, started experiencing a severe headache and complained to his parents. It was already 7:30 p.m., and darkness was approaching. Vidar decided to pull off the highway in Greene County, Tennessee. He parked at a rest stop and took a walk with his son to help him feel better. Meanwhile, Delfina and Tabitha went to the restroom, where they ran into some unfamiliar girls. As they waited at the restroom exit, Peter was already outside with his father, Vidar. After their short walk, the boy felt better, and they waited for Delfina and Tabitha to return so they could have a snack. At that moment, several people noticed them. In Knoxville, a small motel housed a group of young people from Kentucky who had moved into one of the rooms. The group consisted of 6 individuals: 18 years old Natasha Cornett, 17 years old Karen Howell, 20 years old Joseph Reisner, 14 years old Jason Bryant, 19 years old Edward Dean Mullins, and 18 years old Crystal Sturgill. Many of them faced legal issues, had abusive parents, and came from troubled family backgrounds, often dealing with domestic violence and academic struggles. These young people banded together to live and often lived together in a motel, often renting a room for a long period of time. On April 4th, they checked into a motel in Columbus, just days before the incident occurred in Tennessee. Their unusual and daring behavior quickly attracted the attention of the motel staff. They drew pentagrams and other symbols on the walls, feeling liberated and free from the supervision of older generations. This led them to disregard moral and social norms. Initially, their actions seemed to have a connection to occultism and self-harm. At night, candles flickered outside the motel windows. These young people used razors to cut their hands, which was both a protest against their difficult experiences and a silent plea for help that went unnoticed. This group was attached relationship, with most having endured years of cruelty and oppression, ultimately leading to a series of the tragic incidents. The young people often acted inappropriately and caused big damage to the motel room. They broke furniture and painted on the walls, turning the room into a place resembling a drug den. Some of their actions appeared ritualistic, reflecting their inner turmoil. They actively took part in occult practices linked to Satan, but they sought to push the boundaries further. Psychiatrists who worked with these young people later realized that they were searching for their identity in life. Unfortunately, they had experienced years of abuse and cruelty, leading to a deep-seated resentment towards the world around them. In this environment, violence and bloodshed became common and a way for them to assert power among their peers. It's clear that their minds were not filled with good intentions or kindness. They formed a secretive community that was prepared for more than just drawing pentagrams. They were out for revenge. The most ruthless leader of this group was Natasha Cornett, who stated her intention to start Armageddon and insisted that nothing would stop them. They were resolute in their desire for revenge against the world. Before Natasha, there had been similar confessions, but they were largely overlooked. This lack of attention to her words likely contributed to her extreme actions. Natasha stated that she had been communicating with angels and demons since she was a child. From a young age, she referred to herself as the daughter of Satan and became obsessed with witchcraft, which worsened due to alcohol and drug abuse. In 7th grade, she developed an eating disorder that eventually resulted in her hospitalization in Lexington. Doctors diagnosed her with severe manic-depressive tendencies and a propensity for self-harm and harming others. At 14, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for troubled teenagers. The doctors worked hard to help her with her social and family issues, but unfortunately, their efforts did not yield the desired results. At 17, Natasha fell in love and married a man named Stephen Cornett. However, when Stephen realized that Natasha had serious emotional issues and posed a danger to herself and others, he decided to end their relationship. This breakup deeply affected Natasha, who was already struggling with her mental health, and her condition worsened after she moved to New Orleans. There, she suffered a brutal attack by 5 men, which resulted in severe emotional trauma and further deterioration of her mental state. Natasha became obsessed with the movie Natural Born Killers, which features a young couple traveling across America and committing murders. At one point, she threatened her mother with a knife and ran away from home. During this period, she was at her most unstable, posing a genuine threat to herself and those around her. She sought a way to bring her dark fantasies, inspired by the film, to life. After leaving home, Natasha met a group of people who shared the same difficulties as her. Among them was her best friend, Karen Howell, who was also interested in witchcraft. Karen came from a troubled family and had a history of substance abuse and alcohol problems. She often caused disruptions, both at home and elsewhere. During her school years, she witnessed her parents' tumultuous relationship, including violent arguments and physical abuse from her father. Like Natasha, Karen struggled with thoughts of self-harm and attempted to end one's own life 4 times. Karen's behavior was very unstable, making she could not integrate at school because she was often scolded and criticized by her teachers. She changed schools 4 times and eventually ended up being homeschooled. However, being at home with toxic parents only made her situation worse. During this time, she began holding spiritual sessions in an attempt to communicate with demonic beings, which was made worse by regular substance use. Karen became a passenger in a car that was transporting weapons for a gang. Driving the unreliable car was her boyfriend, Joseph Reisner, who was born in Khazar on October 13, 1976. He never knew his biological father and took on his stepfather's surname when the family moved to Georgia. Joseph's parents' relationship deteriorated significantly, leading to their divorce. His mother, Mary, became actively involved in church activities. By then, Joseph had a reputation as a drug user. He started using drugs at the age of 10 and quickly progressed to harder substances. Joseph claimed to have had intimate experiences with 2 nannies who took care of him. His mother remarried when he was 18, but he continued to use illegal drugs, struggling to connect with his peers. He dated Natasha for a while but broke up with her, although they remained friendly. He then began a relationship with Natasha's best friend, Karen. In December, Joseph joined the army, hoping to build a military career. However, he struggled with substance abuse and was discharged. Feeling lost, he decided to leave everything behind and join a group led by Natasha. During this time, Natasha began dating Edward Dean Mullins, who was born on January 26, 1978. Edward came from a reputable family and did not usually have problems with the law. He worked at a grocery store and was very religious, attending church with his family. However, this changed after he met Natasha. She begins to control him, causing his behavior to change in a worrying direction. He stopped attending church and sided with Natasha against his parents, who were trying to help him return to a healthier life. Sadly, Natasha's influence outweighed his mother's concerns. Edward eventually ran away from home and moved into a motel. Their relationship deepened to the point where they began planning a wedding. The youngest member of the group was 14 years old Jason Bryant, born on July 18, 1982, in the small coal mining town of Helia. Despite his age, he had been on the police's radar for some time. His problems began after he using drugs and alcohol. In fact, his struggles started even earlier, as he had a developmental delay discovered in school, with an IQ of only 85. This thing caused emotional and social issues that negatively affected his life. His parents were indifferent to his struggles, and it was only after meeting Natasha that he decided to become part of the group. During this time, he was involved in a rehabilitation program where specialists tried to help him improve his condition. Unfortunately, their efforts were not enough, and he ultimately gave up on trying to change. Jason and Natasha even engaged in drinking each other's blood, believing it to be a demonstration of their deep love, convinced that it would strengthen their connection. On March 13, 1979, in the city of Harold, there was a girl named Crystal Sturgill who excelled in her studies. However, her life changed when she began using substances during high school. Crystal started smoking in the locker room, which frustrated her teachers. More serious issues emerged in December 1996, when Crystal entered adolescence. She began arguing frequently with her parents and isolated herself at home, which eventually led to her filing a police report. Crystal accused her father of long-term abuse and rape. She claimed that this abuse only ceased after she began dating. Her father denied the allegations, calling her a liar. Following a trial, Crystal was placed under the care of social services. Over time, she lived with 13 different foster families before meeting Natasha and joining her group. In fact, Natasha's Armageddon Cornet plan is already starting to become a reality. On April 6, the group broke into the home of a police officer living nearby. The homeowner was OTV. They successfully entered, stealing pistols of the .&P caliber, 2 boxes of ammunition, and $500 in cash. This marked the beginning of their plot for the apocalypse becoming a reality. Afterward, they returned to Nashville to commence their violent rampage. The group, made up of reckless young people, was traveling in a car that was in poor condition, seemingly on the verge of breaking down. The driver, worried about the car's reliability, was speeding over 30 kilometers per hour above the limit when the police stopped them. They received a fine, but this was just one of many legal issues they would encounter. Ultimately, the 6 Satanists, including Natasha, Edward, Joseph, Jason, Karen, Crystal, armed and prepared, safely reached their destination. They understood that they needed a reliable car to execute their plans. A key task for them was to find an appropriate vehicle, which they planned to steal. They had to move fast before their Chevrolet completely failed. As they continued their journey, prepared for serious crimes, they came across a woman named Delphina Zelaya, who was heading home and had paused at a restroom. While Karen and Natasha went into the restroom, the rest of their group waited in the vehicle. They began discussing their criminal plans and suddenly remembered they had left evidence of their earlier speeding violation. At that moment, they had weapons and money with cartridges in the car, which made them realize they could face serious legal trouble. To avoid getting caught, they decided they needed to change cars. Initially, they considered burning the vehicle. Just then, they spotted Peter and his father, Vidar, as the Lillelid family parked nearby. Natasha's group immediately attracted the attention of the Lillelid family when they came out of the restroom. Delphina approaches Natasha and Karen, who are wearing multiple layers of clothing. She asked if they believed in God, but they said no. She then offered them a religious brochure, while her friendly husband, Vidar, invited the people in Natasha's group to join their picnic. Natasha's group, identifying as Satanists, saw that the family Lillelid had come in a van, which they thought was ideal for their malicious intentions. This sparked a dark plan in the minds of Natasha's group decided to act. They casually joined the family's Lillelid meal. Joseph and Jason were the first to approach the table, followed closely by Natasha and Karen. Seizing the opportunity, Joseph slipped away to the car where Edward and Crystal were waiting. He quietly informed them that it was time to act. Joseph then and people in their group moved stealthily through the parking lot, ensuring no one was watching. Joseph aimed his gun at Vidar, apologized for the situation, and warned that nothing would happen if his family obeyed them. Raised the gun at Vidar, Joseph led him to the minivan. Vidar offered money and a car in exchange for his family release, but Natasha's group insisted on taking all his family to a remote location. They drove the entire family away, with Natasha, Karen, and Jason following closely behind. Joseph remained in his Chevrolet with Edward and Crystal. Vidar was driving the minivan, while one of the kidnappers, armed with a 9mm pistol, kept him under control. The company drove several kilometers before taking a turn onto the first side road they found. After traveling a bit further, they stopped in an isolated area. Holding hands tightly, Lillelid family prayed to God for protection from their predicament. Meanwhile, Natasha's group began to discuss their next steps. Natasha hesitated to release Lillelid's family for fear they might report them to the police. Vidar and his family were once again offered money in exchange for their freedom, pleading to be released with a promise not to inform the police. Natasha's group argued among themselves, with some advocating for the execution of the entire Lillelid family. Jason was against releasing Lillelid family, but assured that he would not harm Tabitha and Peter. He persuaded Karen and Natasha to go back to the van where Joseph was waiting. Shortly after, gunfire erupted in the street during the summer. Vidar was shot multiple times. The first bullet struck his eye, followed by 5 shots fired at close range into his chest using 2 pistols stolen from a police officer. The assailant then shot Delphina 8 times, with 2 bullets breaking her femur, 1 hitting her arm, and ultimately, she was shot in the stomach while already on the ground. Both Delfina and Vidar were killed with pistols of different calibers. The medical examiner concluded that 28-year-old Delfina did not die instantly. Instead, it struggled for about 20 minutes after the attack. Unfortunately, Natasha's group did not stop there. They broke their promise and they turned to attack Tabitha and Peter. With Tabitha, they shot her once in the head with a .25 caliber weapon. As for Peter, they fired 2 shots. The first bullet entered behind the right ear and exited through the right eye, while the second shot hit the back and pierced the right lung. This account of incident is based on the testimony of Natasha Cornett, whose story aligns most closely with the evidence. However, she is not considered completely reliable. From the start, Natasha claimed that Jason was responsible for the murders. In contrast, Jason defended himself by stating that he could not commit such acts of cruelty and pointed to Joseph as the actual killer. At that time, Joseph said he was sitting in the van with his eyes closed to avoid seeing what was happening outside. He alleged that all the criminals, including Natasha, Edward, Jason, Karen, and Crystal, were involved in the massacre, but Jason was identified as the scapegoat because he was a minor and could not be tried as an adult. Such a terrible crime could lead to the death penalty. The criminals were caught fairly quickly. A construction worker at a nearby site, who had spent the night in the building, heard gunshots. At first, he thought they were just hunters and ignored them. However, after a disturbing silence, he heard loud laughter, which made him uneasy. He described the laughter as sending shivers down his spine, followed by more gunfire. This combination of frightening sounds raised his suspicions, leading him to call the police. At the crime scene, the police encountered a shocking sight, 4 bodies were piled in a ditch. As officers got closer, they found Delfina in pain, but she died shortly after their arrival. Vidar was already dead, and Tabitha was lying face down on him. Despite her severe gunshot wound, Tabitha was still breathing. When a police officer approached, he found Peter lying there. The boy cried, and the officer stayed with him while immediately calling for medics. The officer comforted Peter by holding his hand until the ambulance came. Tabitha and Peter were then airlifted to a regional hospital where they fought for their lives with the help of doctors. Sadly, 6-year-old Tabitha did not survive. Nearby, an abandoned blue Chevrolet still faintly illuminated the darkness with its headlights. Tire tracks belonging to a family van were also discovered at the scene. A plan was devised to track down the criminals, leading to the blockage of all nearby roads. Police stopped vehicles, focusing on a Chevrolet abandoned by the miners known at the scene of a massacre. Although the car's identification number was found, it had been removed and discarded about a kilometer from the site. The police then contacted Joseph's mother, who had reported him missing 2 days before the incident. She also mentioned Natasha, whom Joseph intended to elope with to Mexico. Their vehicle was detained at the Mexican border, where they had no identification documents. On April 8, around 5 p.m., they arrived at the U.S. border, and their car was checked against a database. It was discovered that the van was stolen and that the individuals might be involved in a triple murder. As a result, the group comprised of Natasha Cornett, Edward Dean Mullins, and Crystal Sturgill was arrested. After being detained, they quickly confessed to stealing the car and admitted to their involvement in the murders. They started telling a ridiculous story claiming that the Lillelid family died in an accident, saying they had been run over by a minivan during a U-turn. However, the police were aware that the Lillelid family had actually been shot, with gunshot wounds on their arms and legs. There were many conflicting accounts about how these injuries occurred. The judge received multiple requests from the defense to hold separate hearings for each defendant. The lawyers also asked for individual hearings. But all these requests were denied. For older defendants, including Natasha, Edward, Crystal, Joseph, faced the possibility of the death penalty, while Karen and Jason could receive life sentences without the chance of parole. The local community rallied together, demanding the death penalty for these violent criminals. Each hearing attracted a crowd outside the court, chanting for justice. During the interrogations, each person in Natasha's group attempted to blame one another for the crime. Most of them pointed fingers at Jason, citing his young age as a reason for their accusations. However, their accounts were all inconsistent, making it difficult to establish a clear timeline of incident or determine who actually shot Lillelid family. This uncertainty has led to ongoing debates, but the judge concluded that each member of the group contributed to the circumstances that resulted in the family's shooting. While not everyone pulled the trigger, all were present during the kidnapping and murder and did nothing to intervene. Despite having the chance to help, but none of them tried to save the Lillelid family, resulting in their shared guilt. The hearings commenced in March 1998. By this time, all 6 individuals had, including Natasha, Edward, Crystal, Joseph, Jason, Karen, on their lawyer's advice, pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal with the prosecution. This agreement secured them life sentences without the possibility of parole and allowed them to avoid the death penalty. However, many local residents opposed this thing, calling for the execution of the underage offenders. The 6 individuals are still seeking to have their cases reviewed, arguing that they were too young to fully understand their actions and that they were unable to resist the influence of the others. They continue to deny their involvement and shift blame among themselves. The first person to appeal was the group leader, Natasha, who, along with the others, was denied in 2017. Karen submitted a letter claiming her innocence, stating that she did not participate in the shooting of the Lillelid family and did not deserve life imprisonment alongside the actual murderers. She also addressed rumors that their group was a cult and that they arranged the bodies in a cross shape, asserting that these accusations were false and that they were merely a group of troubled teenagers. However, Karen's appeal was also denied because it was impossible to ascertain the level of involvement of each group member in the crime. 2 years old, Peter was the only survivor from Lillelid's family. The boy underwent a long recovery process, both mentally and physically, and now wears an eye prosthesis. Later, a custody battle ensued between the Vidar and Delfina families for Peter's care. In the end, he moved to Sweden to live with his aunt. Although he never completely overcame the trauma, he returned to the US as an adult, where he started a family and built a career. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jean Domenico. Jeanine Domenico was born on August 29, 1959, in Massachusetts, USA. After graduating from college in 1987, she moved to Shore, New Hampshire, where she married Anthony Kaczynski and started a family. They had 2 children, a daughter named Nicole and a son named Charlie, born 2 years apart. Unfortunately, after Charlie's birth, Jean's marriage began to deteriorate. Anthony became aggressive and abusive, which ultimately led to their divorce. After the divorce, Jean worked hard with Nicole, who had a developmental delay. Because of Jean's dedication, Nicole learned to manage her condition by the time she started school. However, after enrolling her children in school, Jean faced financial difficulties and wanted to work more. Fortunately, a neighbor helped care for the children. Despite her busy schedule, Jean prioritized her children and spent all her free time with them. When the children turned 14 and 12, Jean began working at an insurance agency about 20 minutes from home. With her heavy workload, she could no longer pick them up from school, but the teenagers were able to get home on their own, which helped them become more independent. In 2000, while working at an insurance company, Jean met Chris McVan. He was attracted to her professionalism and deep love for her children. They began dating and eventually became engaged, but Jean chose to postpone their wedding plans. She lived in a small house that was too small for the three of them, while Chris had a spacious house of his own. Although Chris was eager for them to move in together, Jean asked them to wait until her children were older, wanting to build her life with them without the added stress. Chris was very understanding and sometimes slept over, but he preferred to leave early in the morning to avoid having to queue for the bathroom. As Nicole's daughter turned 16, she entered a typical rebellious phase and started a relationship that Jean disapproved of. At the same time, Charlie began associating with a bad crowd, becoming hot-tempered and aggressive. It appeared that his transition into adulthood would be even more challenging than his sister's. Jean worried greatly while she was at work, leaving the children at home alone. She was particularly concerned because their biological father had been a domestic abuser who frequently resorted to violence, and Jean feared that her son might follow that same path. On August 6, 2003, the family's day started like any other. Chris woke up at 6 a.m., kissed Jean, and went to work, looking forward to dinner that evening. Jean finished work at 5 p.m. and went home, while Chris was still busy in a meeting. When Chris's meeting finally ended around 7 p.m., he called Jean to check in before they went out for dinner, but he was surprised when she didn't answer. He thought she might be out walking the dogs or busy getting ready. Before leaving the office, Chris noticed he had a missed call from his daughter Nicole, along with a long voicemail. In the message, Nicole sounded worried and frustrated because she had not been able to reach her mother or brother. She said she was going to be with her boyfriend William. The way she spoke was so chaotic that it was difficult for Chris to understand how serious the situation was. Chris decided to drive to Jean's house to talk things over. When he arrived, he quickly noticed Jean's car in the driveway, indicating she wasn't out walking the dogs, as they were barking in the backyard. Chris thought Jean should have been home for at least 2 hours and had enough time to finish her chores before dinner. However, the house was dark and there was no sign of her. Concerned and not getting any response to his calls, Chris used his spare key to unlock the door. Once inside, he found the house eerily quiet, with the lights off as if the power had been cut. He called out for Jean as he moved through the dark rooms, but there was no reply. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he spotted Jean lying motionless on the kitchen floor. Chris feared she had passed out again due to her new strict diet, as she had fainted several times before from hunger. Worried she might have hit her head, he rushed over, shook her gently, and called her name, pleading for her to wake up, but she didn't respond. In the dark, Chris saw a puddle of blood beneath Jean. Panicking, he took out his mobile phone and called the rescue service. When the dispatcher answered, Chris's voice trembled, and he mumbled in confusion. He told the operator that he thought Jean had fainted due to her diet and had hit her head, which explained the blood. Without any light, he couldn't grasp how serious the situation truly was. As he waited for the police and medics, Chris sat in a chair, trying to calm down. He failed to notice the bloodstains scattered across the kitchen or the broken and disordered furniture around him. On the refrigerator, there was a note from his daughter. It explained that she wouldn't be joining the family for dinner because she was going out with her boyfriend. The note was signed William and Nicole, expressing their love and gratitude for Jean. Throughout the ordeal, Chris stayed in contact with the 911 dispatcher. However, due to his panic and shock, he struggled to follow the instructions and couldn't check for a pulse. While on hold waiting for the police, he still clung to the hope that Jean was alive. He knelt beside her, cradled her head, and gently fixed her hair. He kissed her and whispered that he loved her. In that moment, he felt how cold she was and noticed her vacant, glassy eyes. Chris came to the painful realization that Jean was dead, but he couldn't accept it. The nearest police patrol was just minutes away from the Jean's home. When the officers arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. 43-year-old Jean lay in a pool of her own blood in the kitchen, having been brutally stabbed and beaten. It was clear her death was violent. Understandably, Chris, her lover, became the primary suspect. He was visibly shaking when the patrol arrived, struggling to speak after discovering her body. Karen Smith, a 29-year-old mother of 3 and a frequent babysitter for Jean, saw the disturbance in the yard and went to investigate. While Jean's fiancé was in shock and crying, the police spoke with the neighbor, hoping she might have heard or seen something during the attack. Unfortunately, she couldn't offer any useful information. The police cordoned off the area around the house, preventing local residents from entering the secured zone while they conducted their investigation. When local residents learned about the murder, they were heartbroken. Jean was a kind and vibrant woman, making her death particularly shocking to those who knew her. Neighbors felt unsafe knowing that a dangerous killer was still at large. At the crime scene, police uncovered evidence of a horrific attack involving multiple knives. One knife was found in the sink with a broken handle, while the blade lay on the floor near the victim's body, suggesting it broke during the assault. Another knife was discovered in the backyard, and a bloody palm print was found on the refrigerator. A trail of blood stretched from the kitchen to the living room, leaving even seasoned police officers stunned by the severity of the crime. Police noted that the killer appeared so angry that they did not care about the evidence they left behind. This type of behavior often indicates that the perpetrator had a personal connection to the victim and may have harbored a deep grudge against her. After a brief examination of the scene, the officers returned to Chris, who was still in shock and struggling to answer even basic questions. They watched Chris closely, as he was the prime suspect due to his unusual behavior and the circumstances surrounding him. Once Chris was able to speak with the officers, he shared his own suspicions. After realizing that Jean's death was not an accidental fall, he believed that only one person could be responsible. In his opinion, Jean's ex-husband, Anthony Kaczynski, was abusive and had a troubled relationship with her. The police recorded his statement and spoke to Jean's neighbors and relatives, who confirmed that Jean had indeed had problems with Anthony. She had previously mentioned being afraid of him. It was known that the teenager had a bad relationship with his mother. He felt angry with her because they had become estranged from his father and other issues. After hearing the conversation, Charlie believed that his father could not have harmed his mother, so he reported this belief to the police. He quickly called his father to clarify, and Anthony assured Charlie that he had nothing to do with the incident. Later, Anthony's alibi was verified. Chris said that Jean was so afraid that she wouldn't even keep knives in the house, fearing that her son Charlie might use them in future conflicts. In fact, Jean was so afraid of sharp objects that she refused to even keep them in the house. Before she started dating Chris, she had confided many times that she felt like she was about to die from cold weapons. Surprisingly, this strange obsession turned out to be a premonition. After Chris gave her a set of knives, Jean had a hard time agreeing to use them. At first, she locked the set in her bedroom when she went to sleep. Gradually, she got used to it and started using it recently. Before the tragedy, Nicole and Jean's arguments began. Nicole increasingly clashed with her mother, who still treated her like a child. One of the main obstacles was Nicole's relationship with her boyfriend. Jean was not sure Nicole was old enough to be with Nicole's 18-year-old bad boy, William. At the time of the massacre, they had been dating for over a year. They mostly communicated on the internet. Jean and her daughter disagreed on this issue. Nicole met William in May 2002 when she was 14 years old, and the guy was 17. They began to correspond, and their connection immediately strengthened. Despite the fact that the young man lived in Connecticut with his mother, the couple seriously intended to date and develop a relationship. The young man was born prematurely in 1985 into a dysfunctional family. Once, when he was still very young, his father quarreled with his wife and struck her hard in the face. Life in a cruel and indifferent family had a negative impact on the William. From a young age, he displayed aggressive behavior, frequently breaking things and often hurting his sisters. During this time, his father's inappropriate actions forced their mother, with 5 children to care for, to seek refuge in a motel. One tragic day, the family's house caught fire, and he watched helplessly as their belongings were consumed. He feared that his father was trapped inside. The sound of fire truck sirens haunted him for many years. His mother observed that after the fire, he changed significantly. William began to frequently discuss death, exaggerate his childhood experiences, and express a wish to die to her. As he grew older, William began to exhibit cruelty and aggression, often directed at strangers. When he was 8 years old, he experienced a devastating loss when 2 of his best friends died in a car accident. This trauma deeply affected him, leading to the development of psychological disorders that resulted in his admission to a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. During his treatment, he struggled with anger towards his mother, which he expressed during phone calls. While at the psychiatric clinic, William was prescribed medication to help manage his aggression, but this had a negative impact on him. He became reliant on these drugs to control his behavior. His mother believed that repeated hospital stays were the only solution to his mental health issues. However, doctors were unable to provide a clear diagnosis, rendering their efforts largely ineffective. Starting at the age of 9, William's problems intensified. In 1994, he attacked one of his sisters with a baseball bat and damaged various items in the house. This led to another hospitalization, and similar incidents occurred 2 more times. Throughout these admissions, doctors tried to understand what disorders he was facing. Another significant episode happened when he was 13, during which he frequently ran away from school and initiated fights. The longest duration he spent in a psychiatric clinic was an entire year. After that, William continued to attack his sisters and mother, often using his favorite weapon, a baseball bat. Following a lengthy treatment at the clinic, he was prescribed a new medication aimed at stabilizing patients with schizophrenia. From that point on, William's behavior became noticeably more manageable, bringing relief to his mother and sisters. However, in 2001, about a year before he met Nicole online, he had another outburst of anger. He threatened to harm himself, prompting his mother to call the police. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital again, where he stayed for about a month. When William started dating, he and his girlfriend began to communicate regularly through the internet and phone calls. This long-distance relationship turned out to be quite expensive, with Jean quickly noticing the high costs. Their frequent calls resulted in bills of $500 and even $1,000. The age difference in William's behavior became major concerns for Jean, who was already worried about the relationship. Jean was concerned about her daughter's future and the potential risks of her relationship with an older man. Meanwhile, William was charming Nicole with compliments and showing sensitivity, which easily swayed the inexperienced schoolgirl. Jean suspected that William was intentionally trying to make Nicole fall in love with him in order to push for a more intimate relationship. Jean recognized that this kind of behavior often comes from manipulators, and she feared her daughter might become a victim of someone like him from the internet. As a result, she tried to slow down the progression of their relationship. When Jean began to receive large phone bills, she banned Nicole from using the phone. This decision upset Nicole and led to an argument. In response, William wrote to Jean, expressing his admiration for her and thanking her for raising such a wonderful daughter. He asked her permission to continue seeing Nicole, saying that he was serious about their relationship. They had plans to move in together and start a family, and they both wanted to find jobs. However, instead of feeling happy about this, Jean was filled with fear. She felt that William was dangerous. Nicole convinced her mother to take her to Connecticut to meet William in person. Her mother saw this as an opportunity to end their relationship, believing that seeing the bad guy in person would turn Nicole off. She planned an 8-hour trip with Nicole. Unfortunately, her plan backfired. After the meeting, Nicole fell even more in love with William and ignored her mother's warnings about him. Nicole cried for 2 hours on the way home over the breakup, leaving Jean shocked at her daughter's immaturity. Nicole pleaded to transfer to a school in Connecticut so she could be near William. But Jean made it clear that until Nicole turned 18, she would live with her mother and younger brother. This became a source of tension in their relationship for the next 15 months. William got a job at McDonald's, helping his family financially while also trying to win over Nicole's mother. Meanwhile, Nicole struggled to live with her mother and brother, away from her boyfriend. Nicole and William both write letters to Jean, but their attempts seem childish and unconvincing. Jean remains adamant that Nicole must stay with her until she is an adult. William got his driver's license and saved enough money to buy a car, which made him excited to visit Nicole. In August 2003, he fulfilled his dream and went to see her. Nicole's mother hesitantly allowed him to stay for just a week so they could spend time together. Because Jean worked long hours, she let William stay at her home when she wasn't there. Their neighbor, Karen, occasionally checked on them throughout the day, claiming she was protecting them from getting too close. This, of course, was naive. One day, Nicole asked Karen to buy a pregnancy test, revealing that she and William had grown intimate. Karen was shocked and intended to tell Jean about it, but she never got the chance. Tragically, Jean was found dead in her home. The forensic expert concluded that she had been brutally beaten with a baseball bat. The evidence, including her injuries and the disarray in the house, indicated a prolonged struggle. In addition to numerous blunt object injuries, 53 stab wounds were found on Jean's body, especially on her arms, suggesting that these were defensive wounds during an attack. The most severely injured areas of the Jean were her head, face, neck, and upper chest. The attacker intended to kill her. Forensic analysis revealed 28 stab wounds concentrated in the neck, face, and upper body, indicating the seriousness of the injuries. The forensic expert noted that the Jean suffered for a prolonged period. Despite multiple injuries, only one stab wound to her arm struck a vital area, rendering her unable to move or call for help. This ultimately led to her losing consciousness and dying during the assault. The attacker also punctured her lung, causing her to suffocate as it filled with blood. When Chris learned of the severity of the attack, he was devastated. At that point, he regained consciousness and was willing to cooperate with the police. He provided a DNA sample. Chris went on to blame Jean's ex-husband, Anthony, for the attack, saying that Jean had expressed fear of Anthony, claiming that he had threatened to kill her. In the evening, Nicole and William returned to the house but were stopped by the police cordon and not allowed onto the property. The officers were initially unsure of their identities. Once they recognized the young couple, the police detained them and took them to the station for questioning. William appeared very anxious and restless, explaining that his anxiety stemmed from mental health issues. His mood fluctuated rapidly. At times he was friendly and willing to talk, while at other moments he became aggressive and withdrawn. This erratic behavior raised the officers' suspicions. Nicole and William were interrogated separately. William stated that he last contacted Jean around 2 p.m. He mentioned that they had walked together in the supermarket and planned a family dinner with Jean and Chris that evening before he was supposed to return to Connecticut. He claimed he knew nothing about the attack. In contrast, Nicole began crying immediately, making it hard to understand her. She became even more distressed when she learned about her mother's death. After a while, she calmed down enough to explain that they had spent the day in the supermarket. However, her account had significant inconsistencies compared to William's, which led police to suspect that he was not being truthful. As a result, they requested DNA samples for analysis. The main issue was Nicole's story about buying a shirt that William claimed to have worn all day, but it was missing when he was arrested. He also couldn't explain the whereabouts of the new shirt, which raised suspicions. This was odd, unless he got rid of it because it was stained with blood. When the police noticed this detail, William became visibly more nervous as they asked him probing questions. Eventually, he grew aggressive and refused to talk, citing his mental health problems. The police then asked when he last took his medication. At first, he said he hadn't taken his last dose due to being held and questioned, but later he changed his story and admitted he had not taken his pills for several days. The young couple seemed to be hiding something and begin to feel pressured. Nicole tearfully shares her problems with her mother, while William confesses that he has many burdens on his conscience that he feels he cannot reveal. They reveal that William has been planning to take Nicole with him when he leaves home, a plan that Jean is strongly against. William constantly pressures Nicole. This manipulation makes her feel responsible for their troubles, and she often blames her mother for forbidding them. Eventually, the couple managed to escape from the police station, but they were caught again 2 days later. This time, Nicole and William confessed to killing Jean and were questioned separately. At first, William joked about her death, but it quickly became clear he was serious. He suggested they mix prescription drugs into Jean's morning coffee, thinking she would either overdose or fall asleep while driving, leading to a fatal accident. Unfortunately for them, their plan did not succeed. William came up with a new plan. He decided to add bleach to the cream that Jean used in her coffee. However, Jean noticed the strong smell and refused to drink it, which led them to think of more extreme measures. They considered setting Jean on fire in a car, but William's childhood fear of flames made that plan unfeasible. They then thought about blowing up the house with her inside, but that plan also didn't work out. Ultimately, William chose to confront Jean with a baseball bat, a weapon he had favored since he was a child. Initially, Nicole opposed this violent idea, but after some consideration, she changed her mind and agreed. On the day of the attack, William waited at home with the electricity turned off. Meanwhile, Nicole stayed in a car parked at a nearby store, making sure Chris wouldn't come back. When Jean entered the house, an argument broke out between her and William. In a sudden moment of escalation, he grabbed the baseball bat, marking it as the point of no return. The confrontation quickly turned violent as he swung the bat. Despite Jean's efforts to defend herself, he continued to strike her. Then, he picked up a larger knife and inflicted even more injuries. When police asked William how many times he stabbed Jean, he said it was about 8, but that was a significant understatement. In reality, he inflicted 53 stab wounds on her. After the brutal incident, William tried to clean up the house before going back to the car where Nicole was waiting. Visibly shaken, he urged Nicole to go home and get him a towel to clean up the blood, and she agreed. Nicole entered the house, unfortunately stepping over her mother's body. She left a note on the refrigerator, took a towel and a knife she found, but then discarded both items before going to get William a change of clothes. The police collected evidence at the crime scene, including bloody handprints on clothes and shoes. William and Nicole were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. From the start, William's lawyer highlighted his mental health issues. However, according to the prosecutor's office, William was aware of his actions during the attack and had meticulously planned the crime. Nicole convinced the prosecution to accept a deal. As part of this agreement, she later testified against William, resulting in her receiving a prison sentence. However, she could reduce her sentence by 5 years if she completed an educational program while incarcerated. In 2005, William's trial began. Nicole claimed her actions were motivated by innocence and love, but she had played a role in the tragedy of her mother's death. The defense highlighted William's family problems. It was known that his mother drank heavily during her pregnancy, which may have contributed to his premature birth and many of his developmental challenges. The prosecution argued that Nicole had incited him to kill his mother. Nicole was aware that her boyfriend struggled with anger management. According to the defense, she exploited William for her own gain. William argued that he should be placed in a mental hospital instead of prison. However, the trial did not support this request. The jury found William Sullivan guilty and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Solomon family. Angela grew up in a religious family in Nashville, USA. She was talented in singing and excelled academically. Then, she earned a doctorate in pharmacy and was successful in her career, which allowed her to earn a good income. She bought a house and lived a fulfilling life. In 2001, she reconnected with Aaron Solomon, a charismatic guy she had known since school. He was a sports presenter on a TV channel and made a good impression on her. The couple started dating, and just a few months later, Angela became pregnant with a son. In 2002, their first child was born, named Grant. Immediately after that, Aaron proposed to Angela, but their relationship was complicated, and she was unsure about marriage. She initially planned to raise the child on her own. However, her religious family pressured her to marry, and she eventually agreed. Aaron turned out to be a caring father and loving husband. And their relationship improved. For years after their wedding, in October 2006, they welcomed a daughter named Gracie. Grant, who was 4 years old at the time, was thrilled to have a younger sister. He stayed by her crib and helped his mother with her care. Then, he began playing baseball and became a successful player on his school team, gaining popularity among his peers. After the birth of Gracie, the parents' relationship worsened. Aaron was a controlling and possessive man who insulted his wife and children while having multiple affairs. He used his status as a presenter to start many affairs. In 2013, 7 years old, Gracie told her mother that her father was bothering her during bath time. It was discovered that Aaron had prohibited his wife from bathing their daughter, insisting on doing it himself, and even filmed his daughter without clothes. Angela forbade Aaron from bathing or touching their daughter. Although he admitted to his actions, he threatened Angela, warning that he would take their children away if Angela told anyone. As an active church member, he demanded complete obedience from his family, so Angela felt compelled to remain silent. Angela finds out that Aaron has cheated on many other girls and learned he was molesting minors. In 2014, explicit photos of minors were found on his phone, but the incident was covered up, and he lost his job. However, then he found a new job as a financial consultant at a large bank. The couple began to argue more often. Angela wanted a divorce, but Aaron refused and suggested they see a family psychologist. Angela agreed, and during therapy, it was revealed that she had been dealing with victim syndrome throughout her life. Her parents had been harsh, imposing their religious beliefs on her, and she had entered an unfortunate marriage with Aaron, who was narcissistic and struggled with sexual addiction. The sessions didn't help with their family problems. Angela found another psychologist she trusted and shared all the details of her life and family issues. She started considering a plan to leave Aaron, who was controlling and wouldn't let her go. She kept notes on her phone and communicated with the psychologist via email. However, Aaron was secretly listening to her therapy sessions, checking her phone and email, and was aware of all her plans. She complained to her parents about Aaron's troubling behavior, but they didn't support her. They sided with he, believing, due to their faith, that a woman should endure her husband's behavior and keep the household intact. She felt unsupported by everyone. Aaron's behavior deteriorated, and he started to become violent towards his wife and children. The children, wanting to protect their mother, they began sleeping in the same room out of fear of their father. One day, Aaron attacked Angela in the bathroom, attempting to strangle her with a hairdryer cord. She was ready to say goodbye to life when her 11-year-old son, Grant, intervened and managed to stop his father. Terrified, she and the children chose not to tell anyone about the incident and did not report Aaron to the police. However, he called 911, falsely claiming that she had tried to end your life using the cord. She was then hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, despite asserting that she was mentally sound. Eventually, doctors reassured her that she was indeed healthy. Angela's psychotherapist learned about her situation and shared their correspondence, explaining that Angela was a victim of domestic violence. Angela was discharged from the hospital on May 11, 2013, and was advised to obtain a restraining order against her husband. Medical records confirmed she was not depressed, had no end-your-life thoughts, no history of mental health issues. However, she was indeed a victim of domestic violence and was in a dangerous situation. After her release, Angela was determined to secure a restraining order against her husband and file for divorce. Upon returning home, she found the house empty. She attempted to contact Aaron, but he did not respond. She also tried calling her own parents and his parents, but received no answer. Her relatives dismissed her as mentally ill and ignored her. The next day, May 12, was Mother's Day. Angela hoped Aaron would bring the children to visit her, but instead, the police arrived at her house. He had falsely reported to 911 that she was attempting to end your life. The police checked on her, but they found no cause for concern and left. Time passed, and Angela received a restraining order but still did not know where the children were. She contacted the police several times, asking them to locate the children, but they refused to take her statement because the children were with their father, Darren, who had the legal right to have them. He had not kidnapped them. She soon discovered that he had filed for divorce first and had obtained a restraining order against her. He claimed she was a danger to him and the children. Divorce proceedings began, and both his parents and her parents spoke against her. As a result, he was granted full custody of the children, and the court ordered she to pay child support. The children were not present in court and were not asked with whom they wanted to stay. The judge noted that she had been in a mental hospital, which was enough to deny her custody claims. She couldn't do anything about her children. Angela continued to live with her father and fought hard to challenge the guardianship, arguing that the children were not well with Aaron. A retrial for the guardianship case was scheduled. He hired top lawyers for the case, having recently received a large inheritance from a wealthy aunt who had passed away. During the trial, Angela's relatives once again testified against her, alleging she was intent to end her life. However, this time, psychotherapists and staff from the psychiatric hospital defended her. They confidently stated that she was a victim of Aaron's abusive behavior and had never attempted to end her life. Her injuries were inflicted by her husband. Despite this, the judge ignored their testimony and awarded full custody to Aaron. Angela did not give up and repeatedly challenged the custody decision, eventually securing the right to see her children for 2 hours a week. When she finally saw them, she was shocked by their condition. Both Grant and Gracie had lost weight, and Gracie had severe bruises under her eyes. Aaron disciplined them harshly, using physical violence, enforcing a strict diet, and banning unhealthy and sweet foods. Grant once jumped out of a moving car to escape from his father and was injured. The children were told by their father that their mother, Angela, was dead when she was actually placed in a mental hospital. He also said it was unsafe there, so they needed to move. The children believed their father at the time because they saw their mother in a bad state after being strangled and felt hopeless, thinking no one could help them. Angela fought to gain full custody of the children, which required her to undergo a psychiatric examination to prove her mental health. She passed the examination successfully. In 2014, the court increased Angela's child visitation rights to 6 hours per week, but kept the children with their father. She continued her legal battle. In early 2015, Angela received devastating news. Aaron had been raping 9-year-old Gracie for several months. The frightened girl felt she couldn't tell anyone. She described feeling sleepy and falling asleep after eating. Then she wake up in her father's bed with severe pain in her crotch and bruises on her thighs. She didn't know how the bruises got there. Her father, Aaron, claimed it was a rash from her bathing suit, but she knew that wasn't true. He never took them to the doctor, fearing exposure, even when they were very sick. Gracie recounted how Aaron beat them, drove recklessly to scare them, and neglected their basic needs. Angela was horrified by this information and tried to use it to gain custody of the children from Aaron, their abusive father, awaiting a new trial. In April 2015, Aaron filed a complaint against Angela for not paying child support, leading to her arrest. She argued that Aaron was not properly caring for the children and was using the child support money for himself and his lovers, despite having inherited wealth. Angela was later released and continued to pay child support. She fought for her children for several more years, reporting Aaron to law enforcement, contacting his church, and warning the church school about the danger he posed. However, no one took her seriously, and everyone thought she was crazy. In 2018, Grant and Gracie ran away from home. Aaron immediately contacted the police, and the children were found quickly. When they returned, Aaron punished them harshly. Angela, upon discovering this, requested an emergency custody hearing due to Aaron's abusive behavior. On August 17, 2018, during Grant's baseball tournament, Aaron and Gracie came to watch the match. After the match, Aaron took Gracie with him, while Grant stayed at the sports camp. Aaron rented a hotel room with only one bed for the night. Despite 12-year-old Gracie's request for a room with 2 beds, Aaron raped her that night. The following day, on August 18, an emergency custody hearing took place. Gracie disclosed what her father had done, but Aaron's lawyer denied the allegations, suggesting that Gracie imagined the incident and arguing that Aaron, being a loving father, couldn't have committed such an act. Later, Grant testified that his father was abusive, beat him, fed him poorly, humiliated him, and forced him to train all day. Both children expressed their desire to live with their mother, not their father. However, the judge did not believe them. He concluded that Angela and the children were lying to damage Aaron's reputation because Aaron attended the same Grace Church as the judge and a senator, where he was well regarded. This was a closed, deeply religious community. Aaron attended church every Sunday, never missing an event, and was well regarded by the community's elite. People couldn't believe that Aaron was capable of such monstrous behavior. And there is no evidence that he abused the children. The judge dismissed Angela's request for custody. During the trial, Gracie clung to her mother and was reluctant to leave with her father. However, when her father threatened to call the police, she had no choice but to go with him. The mother lost custody rights, but the children were unable to stay with their father either. Gracie and Grant sought help from school staff, a psychologist, and the church, sharing the terrible things their father had done to them. However, the principal called them in and urged them to remain silent to protect both their and their father's reputations. Despite their efforts to explain why they didn't want to return home, the principal dismissed their claims, saying he had heard it all before and didn't believe them. He contacted their father, who then removed them from school. Nobody believed the children, as everyone thought Angela had coerced them into falsely accusing their father. One day, Gracie and Grant couldn't take it anymore and ran to their mother, Angela. Then, Aaron came to look for them and asked them to return. Grant and Gracie refused, and he allowed them to live temporarily with their mother. With the help of therapy, they set boundaries, and their father began to respect them. Grant and Gracie sometimes had to live with their father, as he still had more custody rights, but most of the time they lived with their mother. During those times, they were happy, and the relationship with their father became more tense and reached its peak. On July 20th, 2020, 18-year-old Grant was driving to his training, which was about an hour away from Angela's house. Upon arriving at the parking lot, a tragic accident occurred in which Grant lost his life. His father, Aaron, who was also at the training, witnessed the incident. He immediately called 911 for help for his son. Aaron later recounted the event. Aaron explained that he had exited his pickup truck to retrieve his gear from the back. While standing in the parking lot near the building, he was focused on his phone and did not notice the pickup rolling backwards. The vehicle hit him, dragging him several meters before it went down a deep ditch. Aaron, who was there with 3 others, saw everything unfold. When the police arrived, they found Grant lying on his back beneath the front of a car, but the tires were not touching him. Blood was streaming from his nose and ears. Using a jack, they managed to lift the car and pull him out. He was still breathing, so they performed CPR and rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Grant, who was in serious condition, died on the way without regaining consciousness. Although he had multiple injuries, but the official cause of death was cardiac arrest. Strangely, Aaron accompanied him to the hospital and signed papers preventing an autopsy and organ donation. When Angela learned about the incident, she hurried to the hospital and requested an autopsy, but her pleas were ignored. The police classified the case as an accident and didn't pursue further investigation. Angela believed Aaron's account of the incident was false, pointing to various inconsistencies. Grant's injuries didn't match those of someone trapped under a car. He had no typical crushing injuries. The hospital recorded just 1 head injury and 3 bruises, on his jaw, left hip, and right hip. Aaron claimed Grant drove a pickup for about an hour to reach his training, yet there were no burn marks from a hot car, nor were there abrasions from being dragged on asphalt. At the scene of the tragedy, there was no blood, and Grant's shoes were completely clean, which contradicted Aaron's story. The grass near the car's exit and the path where the body was dragged were untouched. There weren't even tire tracks where they should have been. Instead, they were found on the other side of the sidewalk. Grant's glasses were discovered there too. He always wore his glasses because he had poor vision without them, shown in all his photos. So, how did his glasses end up on the sidewalk if he wasn't there? He was in the parking lot. Why didn't his glasses fall there when the car allegedly ran over him? According to Aaron, Grant had his back to the car and didn't see it coming when it moved in reverse. Strangely, Grant was found lying on his back under the car but in the opposite direction. How could his body have turned 180 degrees under the car? It seems impossible. Furthermore, how could the car back into the ditch and then get back up and out of the ditch? It was hard to believe. None of the people in the nearby buildings heard Grant's screams, which should have been heard during such an accident. Everything happened quietly, so no one saw or heard anything. There were no CCTV cameras, and the 3 guys Aaron mentioned on the call were not there either. Strangely, Aaron did not attempt to rescue his son from the car, even though Aaron was briefly with him. Aaron just watched as his son died. Grant never stored equipment in the back of the car. He always left his uniform on the back seat. The phone Aaron claimed Grant was using was never found. Although Grant always carried his phone with him and called his girlfriend every morning, he didn't call that day for some reason. There was no damage to the car. Even though the rear bumper of this car model is fragile and prone to breaking, it was intact. It would have been damaged in such a descent. There were no witnesses to this tragic accident. A man saw Aaron walking along the road shortly before the tragedy, in the parking lot. It's unclear what he was doing there, although Aaron claimed he arrived later. At his son's funeral, Aaron described his death as a divine act, leaving everyone surprised. People were shocked by Aaron's lack of emotion. He showed no grief for his son. Angela suspected that he may have hit their son with his car elsewhere and staged the accident by bringing their son to the location afterwards. There was confusion as to why the pickup truck unexpectedly rolled away, as it had been parked correctly and had no previous issues. It was speculated that the truck might have had a technical fault, and although Aaron initially suggested investigating it to sue the manufacturer for compensation, he eventually declined, which was out of character for him since he usually pursued financial gains. He continued to drive the truck without any concern for several months. Angela wanted to investigate the truck herself, but Aaron strongly opposed the idea and promptly sent the vehicle to the scrapyard. This was puzzling, as the truck was in excellent condition and could have been sold for a good price. Angela managed to locate the vehicle in spring 2021 and arranged for an independent examination. Experts concluded that the accident could not have occurred as Aaron had claimed. Angela then pushed for the investigation of the case, which had been closed, to be reopened. Grant had just turned 18, according to Angela, and he had always protected Gracie's from their abusive father. He warned his father that as soon as he turned 18, he would go to court. He and his sister Gracie planned to formally free themselves from their father's control, believing the court would take them more seriously as adults. In Angela's opinion, Aaron feared this and decided to stop his son. Gracie was devastated by the loss of her beloved brother, who could protect her. On May 12, 2021, Gracie, then 14, uploaded an 18-minute video on YouTube in which she described her father, Aaron, as a monster. She claimed that he attempted to kill their mother, raped her, and physically abused both her and Grant, eventually killing Grant's. Gracie fears that her father might harm her now that her brother is gone. They are defenseless, and their father started harassing them. Despite a restraining order, Aaron continued to stalk she and begged her to return home, but she refused. She was granted legal protection, but her father ignored it and kept following her from school. Due to the school principal's friendship with he from church, they refused to enforce the restraining order. After this interview, Aaron once again complained that Gracie was being negatively influenced and turned against him. He persuaded she that she imagined everything and that her mother had suggested the idea of rape. Aaron filed a defamation lawsuit against Angela, gathering people who refuted the information in the video Gracie recorded. He claimed Angela demanded he give up custody and threatened him. Angela was determined to seek justice. At the trial, Aaron withdrew the lawsuit but is considering refiling with a new legal team. Angela and her daughter Gracie are striving for justice for Grant. Gracie prefers to live with her mother and not see her father. They launched a website and gathered support from many people after Grant's death. However, the pastor, the school principal, and other individuals denied any involvement. One of Grant's classmates mentioned that she, along with Gracie, asked the school administration to intervene and protect them from Aaron, but the school dismissed their request, saying it was beyond their responsibility. In Tennessee, there is a law requiring anyone who suspects child abuse to report it to the Department of Children. However, no one reported anything in this case. After Grant's death, students were not allowed to discuss the tragedy at school. Later, the pastor left the church, causing a significant split within the congregation. Currently, Aaron has not been charged with any crimes related to Grant, and he denies all accusations against him. Aaron's supporters occasionally post on social media, accusing Gracie and Angela of lying and behaving unchristianly. Angela and Gracie live together but are afraid of Aaron. Gracie aspires to become an FBI agent to help people through investigations. The tragic story of the Solomon family leaves behind many painful and unforgettable lessons about domestic abuse and violence, as well as society's indifference to victims. Through this story, we clearly see the need to protect children and vulnerable family members from abusive acts. At the same time, the importance of support from the community and authorities is also emphasized. Let's speak up together and protect the vulnerable so that no family has to endure such pain again. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Christina Purcell. Christina Purcell, a 41-year-old veterinarian, worked at a clinic in the small town of Greer, South Carolina, which has a population of 35,000. Her colleagues all described her as an exceptional person. She was regarded as the best in her department and was highly experienced. She had a great sense of humor, which helped alleviate challenging situations at work. Her co-workers respected her, and management highly valued her talents. Christina had a young daughter, whom she co-parented with her ex-husband, John Mello, during the early years of her life. Friends and acquaintances all agreed that her daughter meant everything to her. After their daughter's birth, Christina and John separated but maintained joint custody. Then, she was engaged to a new partner named Bradley. Despite an apparently perfect life, but she was involved in a custody battle with her ex-husband, John, and the custody dispute between them was intense. On October 5, 2021, when their daughter visited her father, John, he flew her to Italy. This prompted Christina to file a complaint against him for violating custody, which further strained their relationship. Christina even launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for her legal expenses, and many people contributed. On October 13, 2021, Bradley, aged 65, tried calling Christina's in the morning. After she failed to answer, he went to her house. He knocked, and when there was no response, he entered through the back door. Inside, he discovered a horrifying scene. Her lifeless body was in the living room with rose petals scattered around. So, he immediately called 911, but it was too late to save her. Police discovered over 30 stab wounds on her body, mostly on her head, face, and neck. Although the scene was chaotic, it did not resemble a typical robbery. The police found unusual mystical objects in the house, hinting that someone unstable might have conducted a sacrificial ritual. This led investigators to consider the possibility of a ritual murder. Forensic experts determined that Christina was murdered elsewhere. Evidence of dragging was found throughout the house, and in some areas, the body was left behind and placed in various positions, possibly to take photographs of sexual acts. Later, the body was moved to the living room and covered with rose petals, with petals also strewn along the path where it was dragged. When information about the incident leaked to the press, they dubbed it the rose petal murder. At that moment, the police have not found any signs of forced entry into the house. However, Bradley, who alerted emergency services, had entered through the back door. He informed detectives that this door was always left unlocked, suggesting the intruder could have entered the same way. At the crime scene, detectives discovered clear signs of staging that complicated their investigation. They had to sort through numerous conflicting pieces of evidence to discard the irrelevant and find the right direction. Detectives have never encountered such complex and confusing murder cases before, making it difficult to determine which lead to pursue. They suspected that the murder was intentional. The perpetrator had specifically gone to Christina's house to commit it. And detectives must find out his motives and who he is. Inside the house, they found memory cards and the laptop in the living room near the body. A transparent handbag containing a powerful illegal drug was also discovered. There were small droplets of dried blood, and Christina's mobile phone lay nearby. In the hallway, A bag was found with 2 white envelopes, each containing $500 in cash. A suitcase held a firearm, a single-shot self-defense pistol, and numerous documents related to a court case involving Christina's daughter, prompting detectives to consider the possibility that her ex-husband, John Mello, was involved. Forensic experts used luminol to examine the entire house, enabling them to detect even the smallest traces of blood. They discovered hundreds of tiny blood spots in various places, highlighting the attack's brutality. Christina suffered a significant loss of blood and endured severe pain before dying. She was stabbed 31 times. The police scrutinized Christina's mobile phone for any leads. Initially, detectives focused on whether her partner, Bradley, who found her body, might be involved in the attack. To compare information, they also retrieved his mobile phone to analyze its contents. Police noticed peculiar behavior from he was highly agitated. His reaction didn't seem like that of a grieving fiancé. He was trembling, inconsistent in his statements, and wore gloves throughout his interactions with the investigators. This behavior only heightened the suspicion of law enforcement. Later, it became clear that their suspicions were justified. While investigating Christina and Bradley's devices, the police uncovered shocking details about Bradley's life, clarifying his nervous behavior. They had strong reasons to suspect that he was exploiting her daughter, Jane Doe, to create explicit content. In February and August, he recorded videos and took photographs of Jane nude in various inappropriate poses. These materials were found on the phone and laptop that were confiscated for examination. However, it is not clear whether this was done secretly or with her consent. Doubts emerged after the police discovered more disturbing information from Bradley's laptop that revealed unsettling aspects of the intimate relationship between Christina and he. The police uncovered increasingly disturbing information, including a new type of victim, animals. Numerous photographs were discovered showing individuals involved in sexual acts with animals, mainly dogs. Shockingly, Christina, one of the clinic's leading veterinarians, who occasionally took animals home for temporary care, was involved in these acts. According to state law, such sexual offenses can result in up to 5 years in prison, and the offender must pay a fine of at least $500, which may be increased at the court's discretion. Law enforcement described these recordings as some of the most repulsive materials they had ever encountered. The public was outraged upon learning that Christina, a seemingly kind woman from a veterinary clinic, was involved in such acts with her daughter and dogs. After discovering all this evidence, Bradley Post was arrested on October 19, 2021. He was charged with the sexual exploitation of a minor and the distribution of explicit materials. It emerged that he not only created photos and videos but also sold them. Additionally, the police considered the possibility of his involvement of Christina's death, but he firmly denied any involvement. Detectives found no evidence linking him to the murder. There was no trace of blood on his body or clothes. Furthermore, Christina had died several hours before he arrived at the house, leading the police to doubt his connection to the murder. Christina's ex-husband, John Mello, is also a suspect in the case. His main motive was gaining full custody of their daughter, which he did not want to share with Christina. This is a common motive for murder. However, at the time of the crime, John was in Italy with his daughter. This alibi was easy to verify since he hadn't returned to the country. Despite this, investigators kept John on their list of suspects, considering he might have orchestrated the crime indirectly. John returned to the country on October 21, 2021, a week after Christina's murder. Following his return, the police obtained a warrant for his detention. He sought help from his best friend, Zachary Hughes, who was 29 years old at the time. Zachary seemed suspicious to the police, so they looked deeper into his background. He was born and raised in Morro Bay, California. The turning point for him came in 2005 when his parents vacationed in Virginia. During this trip, they adopted 5 children from Russia. These children had suffered abuse in their previous foster families, resulting in physical and psychological trauma. The adoption aimed to teach Zachary and his brother Ellie about morality and to provide the adopted children with a safe, loving, and stable home. Zachary and Ellie struggled to communicate with their new siblings, leading to frequent family conflicts due to misunderstandings. Zachary's entire family worked on the farm, but he had a special talent: he studied music. His parents bought him a piano, and he became very skilled at playing it, which was especially noticeable in high school. He started participating in music competitions and won first place at the Southeastern Piano Festival. He has achieved great success, even performing a solo program with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. In 2010, he applied to the Juilliard School in New York, where Irina taught piano at an advanced level. Not only was Zachary accepted, but he was also offered several scholarships for his exceptional talent. Thanks to his exceptional talent, Zachary outperformed all his classmates and became the only student from the USA selected to participate in the International Music Festival in Kyoto. Only 11 people from around the world were chosen for this event. Those who know he say he is a loyal friend, highly moral and very good at communication. In his free time, he used his skills to help those in need, often performing for free at rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, and hospitals to bring joy to people. By 2018, Zachary enrolled in a master's program in piano performance at the university. At that time, he had a strong desire to help people globally. This led him to volunteer for the United States Marine Corps and apply to a military educational institution to become an officer within a year. He understood the intricacies of military service, but at the start of his second year, he suffered fractures in both legs. This injury forced him to halt his studies and receive the title of Hello. Around this time, a woman reached out to Zachary, seeking a talented pianist for a church in Greer, South Carolina. He accepted the offer and moved there to perform regularly. And he received half of the donations collected from churchgoers. Initially, this provided a good income, but by the mid-2020s, the pandemic significantly reduced the number of church attendees. As a result, he had to find new income sources. He began giving solo performances throughout the city and state and took on additional part-time jobs. Additionally, he started a blog offering valuable piano lessons. To support his performances, he acquired portable electrical equipment, which provided him with the necessary mobility. While living and working in South Carolina, Zachary met John, Christina's ex-husband and a former music producer. John supported Zachary by helping him with performances and offers him a part-time job. Between mid-2020 and 2021, when he assisted John with household chores, which deepened their friendship. He became John's closest friend. As a result, the police questioned him about his possible involvement in Christina's murder, wondering if John could have asked him to do such a thing. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed CCTV footage from a camera located near Christina's house. A camera installed in the peephole of the house opposite captured all the incident outside Christina's home on the day of her murder. The footage showed a stranger wearing dark clothing and a hooded jacket entering her house around 10 a.m. A few hours after, the stranger left on a bicycle, this time wearing a mask. Christina did not leave the house, and no one else visited, until the next day, when Bradley arrived and found her dead. This evidence cleared Bradley from the list of suspects in the murder case, although he remained in jail on other charges. Investigators suspected that a stranger in dark clothing, captured on camera, was the killer, but they couldn't identify him. His face was covered, and there were no distinguishing features on his body. They then requested footage from surveillance cameras along the bicycle paths to trace his movements and began reviewing the recordings. This process was lengthy but fruitful. The bicycle appeared in several videos, including one where the stranger in black was loading it into the back of his pickup truck. Although the grainy footage obscured the license plate, the model, make, and color of the truck matched Zachary's vehicle. It seemed he was involved in the brutal murder of Christina's. The police obtained a warrant to search Zachary's house. There, they found a bicycle identical to the one used by the attacker. They seized Zachary's computer for examination. Through this, they discovered active correspondence between John and Zachary, uncovering over 1,700 text messages, most of which were encrypted. The messages were clearly coded and contained hidden information. Additionally, some texts were jumbled. They probably did this to distract the police if the police suddenly contacted them. Detectives found the following clues in the messages. On April 17, 2021, 6 months before Christina's death, John asked to host a party for her. This message was not encrypted. On the day of the murder, John asked a friend how the musical performance went, and the friend replied that everything was great. Although it seemed like a harmless question, the police discovered there was no performance that day. They suspected that John used performance as a code word for the murder of Christina. All other information on Zachary's phone was either encrypted or deleted. He also used an access code unknown to the police, which complicated and delayed their investigation. Additionally, they couldn't obtain data on the device's location at the time of the attack on Christina. The phone was frequently switched to flight mode, including when the mysterious masked man came to Christina's house. It appears this was done on purpose to prevent Zachary from being tracked and to avoid involvement in the crime scene. Based on the evidence collected, officers obtained a warrant for Zachary's arrest. While they were preparing to file charges, Zachary was invited to perform on an international cruise. By the time the warrant was issued, he was already in Europe, so the detectives had to wait. Fortunately, when the charges were filed, Zachary had returned to Michigan, unaware that they were planning to arrest him. He could have easily left the country by crossing into Canada or taking another flight to a cruise ship. However, once he learned about the charges, he voluntarily returned to South Carolina and surrendered to the police, believing they were mistaken. On November 3, 2021, Zachary hired lawyers to defend his reputation, stating he was not guilty of any wrongdoing and intended to refute the slander tarnishing his name. However, he refused to allow the police access to his phone, prompting them to file a court petition. The court subsequently ordered full access to the mobile phone. Despite this, he repeatedly provided incorrect passwords, which delayed the investigation. Finally, by April 8, 2023, after approximately 700,000 attempts, the smartphone was unlocked. The police discovered crucial messages between John and he, discussing their encrypted plans to kill Christina. While these messages were intended to be used as trial evidence, they were considered circumstantial and insufficient to determine the trial's outcome. Zachary and John were known for their impeccable reputation, supported by many witnesses, and had no prior criminal history. The jury could not rely solely on correspondence and footage of a similar car to convict them. More new evidence emerged when a forensic examination uncovered the criminal's DNA under Christina's fingernails, which matched Zachary's DNA. Consequently, the police could confidently assert that he was the one who attacked and brutally killed Christina in her home. The defense argued that the CCTV footage did not clearly show the criminal's face or accurately identify the car involved. As a result, they labeled the evidence as circumstantial, as initially assumed. They emphasized that Zachary had no prior legal issues and was described by friends and acquaintances as a kind person incapable of committing a violent crime. Additionally, there was no apparent motive for him to attack Christina. And the lawyers rejected the DNA test results, claiming the samples were tampered with or contaminated. From the outset of the trial, Once the public became aware that Zachary, the renowned musician, might face imprisonment, the court received numerous letters from dissatisfied people. These letters came from former classmates, teachers, Zachary's friends, and even people who didn't personally know him but admired his musical talent. Among the supporters were also numerous employers who praised his skills. Collectively, they vouched for his character, adamantly believing that someone as talented and kind-hearted could not be a murderer. In total, the court received over 50 such letters. The lawyers emphasized that Zachary had no previous legal issues. He had served in the U.S. Army, having volunteered and pursued education to become an officer rather than just serving as a private soldier. Additionally, Zachary could have avoided any legal troubles by simply accepting an invitation to return to work on a cruise liner. However, he chose to return to his home state and turn himself into the police as soon as he learned about the charges against him. He was fully aware of everything, including the warrants that the police were obtaining to investigate further. Despite this, he wasn't deterred because he believed he was innocent. The lawyers presented this as key evidence of his innocence. Zachary requested to be released on a $100,000 bail so he could be placed under house arrest with his parents until the trial, allowing him to stay in a calm environment where he could play his favorite instrument. He also agreed to have no contact with the families involved in the case. However, the court denied his bail request, leading to his transfer to prison. He remains there, awaiting trial set for 2024. He continues to deny any involvement in Christina's death. John also denies all charges. During a conversation with investigators, he explained that he fled to Italy with his daughter. He said he was exhausted from legal battles with his Christina and was horrified to discover that her fiancé, Bradley, had inappropriate intentions towards his 9-year-old daughter. Evidence suggested Christina was involved, as she appeared in some photos with her daughter. So John claims he took his daughter away to protect her from Christina, her unstable mother. He intended to challenge for custody using the explicit photos taken by Bradley and believed he had a strong case. If Christina lost custody, John would have no motive to harm her. Nevertheless, John repeatedly insisted he would fight for his daughter at any cost, despite he not commenting on his connection to Zachary. The prosecution believes Zachary is involved because his DNA was found under Christina's fingernails, indicating she resisted him. He may be either a co-conspirator or a victim of John's manipulation. The investigation into Christina Purcell's death has become intricate, full of unexpected developments and mysteries. Detectives persist in seeking justice for her, gradually assembling clues to identify the mastermind and uncover the case's dark secrets. Although the journey to bring justice to she may be long, but it will certainly not stop. The investigation team hopes that the case will soon be illuminated, allowing she to rest in peace. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Samantha Knight and Renee Aitken. Samantha Knight was born in 1977. She lived with her parents in the suburbs of Menly, Australia. But her parents' relationship did not last long, and they divorced. Then, she and her mother moved to Bronte. When she was in 6th grade, they relocated again, this time to Bondi, a suburb of Sydney, where they settled in an apartment on Imperial Street. Their lifestyle was modest. Her mother worked long hours, which forced her to be independent. Her father frequently visited and provided financial support. On August 19th, Samantha, a schoolgirl, turned 9 years old. After classes ended at 4 p.m., she returned home around 4:15 p.m., while her mother was still at work. In the 1980s, it was common in the suburbs to use simple door latches. The neighborhood was calm and safe, and everyone knew each other, allowing children to stay home alone in locked houses while their parents worked. This was considered normal, so Samantha had the freedom to come and go from their apartment while her mother was at work. August 19th was just like any other day. After school, Samantha changed into a pink skirt, a dark blue jumper, and blue sandals before heading out for a walk. A few hours later, her mother, Tess Knight, returned home from work and found a half-eaten sandwich in the kitchen, but little girl was missing. Tess wasn't initially worried, as it was common for Samantha to go for walks with friends and sometimes skip meals to do so. She continued with her evening routine, expecting her daughter to return soon. However, as it got darker, Tess began to feel anxious. Samantha usually came home before dark, and her absence was concerning. She decided to search for her daughter. Since they had recently moved to the area, not many people knew her, making the search more difficult. She asked neighbors, acquaintances, and Samantha's friends if they had seen her, but no one had any information, which heightened her alarm. Without a mobile phone, she couldn't call Samantha or track her whereabouts. When she returned home, Tess checked again to see if Samantha had come back while she was out, but she was still missing. In a state of urgency, she called emergency services to report her daughter's disappearance, Samantha. Soon after, the police came to her house. They spoke with she to gather details about Samantha's disappearance. She was confused and said she didn't know what had happened because she was at work. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area, so the police had to rely on tips from witnesses who might have seen something unusual. Police immediately interviewed neighbors, friends, family members of Samantha and anyone nearby for clues. Several store employees reported seeing the girl. Samantha had visited at least 3 different sections of the stores selling office supplies, and she was last seen walking down the street. Some witnesses thought she might have been talking to a man. However, they did not find anything suspicious. The police had no other leads. They thoroughly searched the area and followed the route Samantha had taken, but they did not find anything relevant to the investigation. The public was soon informed about the incident. The police requested assistance from local residents through the media, sharing Samantha's photo and description of clothing. Local residents acted quickly. The very next day, hundreds of volunteers participated in a search operation throughout the city. The media also extensively covered this tragic incident. The possibility that Samantha had left home was not even considered. She was too young. At her age, kids typically do not run away from home to spend time with friends. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had never displayed any rebellious behavior before. Samantha was a sweet, kind, and calm girl who worked hard in school, leading detectives to believe she had been kidnapped, possibly taken from her home by someone who maliciously opened the door. Local residents is extremely uneasy. There had never been a kidnapping in their quiet suburb. Residents began to scrutinize one another, fear that the criminal may be living in their area. Investigators had little information to investigate, relying mainly on interviews with local shopkeepers. Unfortunately, no one could provide useful leads to help locate Samantha. The investigation was further complicated because in the 1980s and 1990s, methods of tracking missing persons were not well developed. There were no alert systems like Amber Alerts, no DNA testing, and other modern investigative techniques. Therefore, law enforcement agencies need to conduct searches as efficiently as possible. For instance, they created a mannequin dressed like Samantha the day she disappeared to help jog the memories of those who witnessed it, but this did not produce the expected results. Tess was heartbroken. Samantha's father also joined the search for daughter. Initially, he was even considered a suspect, as investigators thought he might have kidnapped his daughter to keep her with him. However, he denied these accusations. He explained that he maintains a peaceful and respectful relationship with his ex-wife and sees his daughter regularly. There was no reason for him to kidnap her. When the investigation gets difficult, detectives must try their best to identify suspects. The relatives of Samantha began to lose hope of finding her alive and feared the worst. Police are also leaning towards the theory that the girl may have died, possibly taken by human traffickers and taken to another country. This theory was explored, but for 12 years, there is no evidence to confirm this. When the police received a significant lead from a woman, they focused on a local resident named Michael Guider. He lived near where Samantha had disappeared, had been in prison since 1996 for child rape, and may be a suspect in Samantha's disappearance. Michael's life is full of disgusting incidents. Born in 1950, he grew up in Melbourne with an alcoholic mother and a younger brother named Tim, born in 1953. Eventually, their mother sent them to an orphanage, where Michael faced further sexual abuse from older children, many of whom were under the influence of drugs. Other children also suffered violence, including Tim, but they all remained silent due to threats. Michael's mental health becomes increasingly serious, and as he matures, he begins to negatively impact the other children in the orphanage. When he was 15 years old, he escaped and began a life of petty crime. His younger brother, Tim, no better, he committed armed robbery and was imprisoned for it. After serving his time, Tim seemed to reform. He became a sculptor, got married, and had children, staying out of trouble and off criminal records. In contrast, Michael continued his criminal activities and showed no intention of changing. He never held a steady job and only worked part-time as a gardener, mowing lawns for neighbors. Michael's first arrest came in the 1970s, when he was charged with setting fire to a store. As an adult, he developed a passion for Australian Aboriginal culture and became knowledgeable about rock art. However, in 1996, he was convicted of sexual offenses for molesting 11 children, aged 2 to 16. At least 60 similar charges were brought against him. Some sources suggested that the actual number of victims could be much higher. During the investigation into the child abuse cases, Michael quickly cooperating with the police. This was taken into account during the sentencing. As a result, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Michael usually acts in a consistent manner. He targeted vulnerable single mothers, often those who struggled with alcohol or drug addiction, or those who were easily influenced. By building trust with these women, he presented himself as kind and courteous, manipulating their perceptions to lower their guard. He often sought opportunities to be alone with their children, claiming he wanted to care for them while their mothers were away. Mothers noticed his attentive behavior and had no qualms about leaving him with their children. By posing as a caregiver, he gained access to the children, which he exploited. Michael would give the children Coca-Cola that was laced with sleeping pills. Once they were unconscious, he photographed and sexually assaulted them. Eventually, some children had the courage to tell their mothers about Michael, and the truth was revealed that he was acting like a serial predator. When the police searched his home, they discovered a large stash of photos, numbering in the thousands. Several photos showed instances of sexual abuse while the victim was unconscious, including images of Samantha and one of her friends without clothes. In one of the photos, police discovered the best friend of Samantha. At that time, she was already 21 years old, and detectives attempted to speak with her. However, both she and her mother refused to cooperate. Eventually, they were summoned to court and compelled to testify. Investigators are looking into a connection between Michael, a serial rapist, and Samantha's disappearance. Among the evidence found, police discovered a peculiar album containing newspaper clippings about missing children, including Samantha. Detectives were curious about why he kept these clippings. Normally, criminals often do this to gather mementos related to their crimes. During questioning, Michael claimed he was simply interested in unsolved cases out of curiosity. While this album was not a major issue, when combined with other elements of his criminal record, it raised serious concerns. After reviewing all the evidence, including photographs of violent scenes, police filed 11 additional charges against him. The total sentence for these new crimes was 6.5 years. At that time, investigators were unable to charge Michaels with kidnapping Samantha, but they suspected his involvement in her disappearance and continued to monitor him. While he was in prison, police observed that he was beaten during all interrogations. He endured severe mistreatment, his cellmates attacked and assaulted him, and the guards failing to intervene. In 2000, journalist Denise Hoffman wrote a book about the missing child, Samantha. She was personally acquainted with Michael and highly appreciated his work as a renowned expert on Australian Aboriginal life. He was knowledgeable in this field and had appeared on television. However, despite their friendship and his expertise, Denise had strong reasons to believe that he was linked to the case of Samantha's disappearance. She begins investigating on her own after he confides in her about his wife, who also knows Samantha's mother. Denise noticed that Michael's demeanor changed significantly whenever the conversation shifted to Samantha's case. During these discussions, his expression will change a lot. He began speaking in a strange, muffled tone and appeared increasingly unsettling. This behavior made Denise even more suspicious of him. Unfortunately, Denise were unable to resolve the case and failed to get a confession from Michael. He denied any involvement in Samantha's disappearance, claiming he had only seen her a few times and did not remember her. This was clearly a lie. To assist the police, Michael's younger brother, Tim, agreed to help him confess. Tim underwent intensive training and consulted psychologists to find the most effective method to help Michael tell the truth. Michael was already under significant stress, and as he broke down, he confessed to accidentally killing Samantha in 1986. He described to the detectives what happened the day little girl disappeared. He claimed that he had known Samantha for some time and had earned her trust, which led her to agree to go with him that day. Michael drove her to a remote area in the wilderness. There, he offered her a bottle of Co-Ca laced with sleeping pills. After she drank it, she lost consciousness. When he began to assault her, she suddenly woke up and started screaming. To silence her, he gave her more sleeping pills, and she passed out again. Afterward, he briefly stepped out of the car for a walk. When he returned, he found that little girl was unresponsive. However, he maintained throughout the interrogation that it was an accident. He claimed he only intended to assault her and never meant to kill her, insisting that he had never killed anyone before. Michael accepts responsibility for his actions towards Samantha, but he did not apologize to her family or leave the courtroom. In 2002, he confessed during the trial to the unintentional murder of Samantha Knight and was sentenced to 17 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Samantha's family were outraged by what they considered a lenient sentence, but this was the maximum penalty for manslaughter at the time. The prosecutor called Samantha's best friend as a witness. This girl, who appeared in photographs and was believed to have also been affected by Michael's actions, had previously refused to speak to law enforcement, citing fears of revealing information. Her silence had serious consequences for many children, including the tragic loss of Samantha. She attended court with her mother, who supported her, but their identities were kept confidential. Samantha's best friend mentioned that she often felt lonely when her mother was at work, so she will go for a walk. During those times, she met Michael, who gave her the attention she craved. Friend claimed that Samantha's mother sometimes left she with Michael and even spent the night with him, during which he molested she. However, Samantha's mother firmly denied knowing Michael and insisted that she never left him alone with Samantha. Strangely, the witnesses later retracted their statements about Samantha without providing any reasons. Finding her remains for burial became extremely important. Initially, Michael claimed he couldn't remember where Samantha's body was. However, several years into his prison sentence, he suddenly recalled that he had buried her in Cooper Park, just a 15-minute drive from her home. Yet, he later changed his story again, saying the body was buried a bit farther away than he originally indicated. On the map, he pointed to an area where a yacht club now stands, which was built just a year and a half after Samantha's disappearance. Despite extensive searches in the area using trained dogs, Samantha's remains have never been located. To this day, her body has not been found, and many doubt it will ever be found. In addition, Michael is also suspected in the disappearance of 5-year-old Renee Aitken, who vanished without a trace in South Wales in February 1984. When there was a thunderstorm, her brother went to check on her and noticed she was missing. He found her bed empty and the front door open. He told their parents, who then called the police. They began searching for her immediately. However, there was a storm at the time, so it's possible that all the evidence was washed away. Initially, the main suspect was Brian James Fitzpatrick. A man with a history of child kidnapping, he lived nearby and knew Renee's family. However, he died in a car accident just weeks before his trial. For many years, the case went cold, but in 2013, police revisited the investigation and looked into Michael. At the time of Renee's disappearance, he worked as a gardener close to their home. A family member recognized that he bore a resemblance to a suspicious man who had been seen behind their house. In Michael's scrapbook dedicated to missing children, there were articles and photos of Renee. Researcher Denise Hoffman believed that Renee's case shared similarities with the disappearance of another girl, Samantha, as both were small and light. Michael could have used drugs to incapacitate Renee's and sneak her out of the house. Michael was skilled at gaining the trust of children, causing suspicions that he was involved in Renee's kidnapping. Detectives questioned him about the incident, but he denied any involvement. They believed him, even though he had previously denied involvement in Samantha's case, which he later admitted. However, the police concluded there was not enough evidence to charge Michael with kidnapping, and Renee's case remains unsolved. She has not been found. Both the police and Renee's family believe she has likely been dead for a long time. While in prison, Michael developed an interest in Aboriginal culture and history, studying various materials on the subject. He authored several works, which were sent to libraries across Australia. In total, he wrote 16 pieces, ranging from 6 to 28 pages long. He also pursued studies in archaeology and earned a degree in that field. Michael was remarkably intelligent, impressing everyone with his capabilities. He has the potential to become a scientist and can contribute to research projects. However, he chose a path of crime. In 2014, Michael became eligible for parole after serving the minimum term of his imprisonment. This made the public extremely indignant, as many people believed he should remain in prison. Individuals like him will never change and will continue to pose a threat to society. Due to public backlash, Michael's request for parole was not granted and he remains in detention. The public, including Samantha's mother, wants Michael to spend the rest of his life in prison. She continued to suffer from the pain of losing her daughter. She could not give her daughter a proper burial and had never seen any sign of remorse from Michael. Supporters of Michael sought to challenge his sentence. They pointed to his participation in 55 therapy programs in prison, claiming he had undergone rehabilitation and was a model prisoner, he deserving of freedom. He behaved well and did not violate prison rules, leading to his release on September 5, 2019, at the age of 68. As part of the bail conditions, Michael was required to stay under strict supervision for an additional 5 years in a special facility for former prisoners. Police fitted him with a tracking bracelet, and he was given a lengthy list of 56 restrictions. These included bans on visiting public places, playgrounds, and schools, a prohibition on contacting minors, restrictions on leaving the country, a ban on changing his name or appearance. He was also subject to regular checks for drug and alcohol use. Despite these measures, there was no guarantee that Michael, the serial rapist, would refrain from committing further crimes. Even his younger brother, Tim, believed releasing him was a mistake. The public was outraged by his release, they fearing that he was already planning new crimes against children. When Michael was released, he had a large tumor in his groin, which he had refused to treat while in prison due to a lack of trust in the medical staff. After his release, he focused on his health, successfully treating the tumor and managing his heart disease. However, he declined medication to reduce his libido because he believed they would interfere with his other medications. Initially, Michael stayed in a shelter near Long Bay, but when the public discovered his location and began to pursue him, he was moved to a secret location. The public was outraged that once his supervision period ended, he would be completely free, able to change his name and appearance, get married, have children, and travel, opportunities that Samantha would never have. This led many to believe that his sentence was unfair. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Nohema Graber. Nohema Graber was born in Mexico. From a young age, she found joy in traveling. Immediately after graduating from high school, she began working as a flight attendant for a local airline. Nohema was one of the first Mexican women to learn to fly passenger planes in the 1970s. At that time, it was not common for women to become pilots, but Nohema was determined to pursue her goal. She paid for her own flying lessons with the money she earned as a flight attendant. In this way, she paved the way for many other Mexican women in the aviation industry, proving that it was indeed possible. This achievement was groundbreaking for her time. Nohema met her future husband Paul at a party where they both expressed their love for each other. However, circumstances forced them apart. Paul had to return to his hometown in the United States. 11 years later, while traveling through Mexico, he reached out to Nohema and asked to meet. She agreed, and after their date, they realized they couldn't live without each other. They started seeing each other more often and communicated regularly by phone. Their relationship progressed towards marriage, and in 1986, they got married in Nohema's homeland when she was 33 years old. During this time, she worked as a flight attendant, pilot, and business consultant in Mexico City. The couple lived happily ever after. Their first child, Christian, was born in 1991, followed by his younger brother Jareth a year later. However, they found Mexico to be an unsafe place to raise children due to widespread crime and unrest, especially in their high-crime neighborhood. As a result, they decided to move to a safer place for their children. In 1992, the Nohema family moved to the small, friendly town of Fairfield, Iowa, USA. The town was a typical American suburb with a low crime rate and a tight-knit community, home to less than 10,000 residents at the time. It was also Paul's hometown. Nohema was a homemaker, while her husband had a good job to support the family. Soon after, the Nohemas welcomed a daughter. For many years, the Nohema family was respected in the community and was known as friendly, humble, and decent people. Nohema was very active and enjoyed hiking in nature. This lifestyle continued until her children grew up and had their own families. Then, conflicts began to arise between Nohema and Paul, which eventually led to divorce. Despite the divorce, both parents maintained a strong relationship with their children. They also kept in touch with each other, calling and talking regularly, and occasionally having dinner together. Paul was a devoted father, actively involved in his children's education. He spent time with them and supported their education. This support continued even after his children were grown. At that time, Nohema, who was in her 50s and finding single life uninteresting, decided to pursue her childhood dream of becoming a teacher. She earned a degree in English and a teaching certificate from the University of Iowa in nearby Mount Pleasant. In early 2012, Nohema began teaching at Fairfield High School, where she quickly became popular among students and staff. The students showed her a lot of affection, which set her apart from other teachers. She also taught Spanish part-time. On November 2, 2021, Nohema did not return home after work. She lived alone, so no one knew what happened to Nohema. It was not until the next morning that the staff at her school noticed that Nohema had not come to work. Her colleagues tried to contact her by phone and through social media, but they received no response. Worried, they contacted her ex-husband, Paul. He was worried because he knew Nohema was a responsible person and would never skip work without informing anyone. Feeling worried, he decided to check on her and drove to her house. No one answered his knock, so Paul began looking through the windows but saw no signs of anything unusual inside. He became concerned that Nohema might have had a medical emergency. He then called the police for assistance. The officers took Paul's statement and went to the house. When they opened the door, the inside was empty and nothing unusual was found. The police quickly questioned those close to Nohema and learned that Nohema was last seen leaving school. She got into her car and drove away. Nohema often went for a walk in the park to enjoy nature after a day's work. The police tracked her phone and confirmed her daily routine. After work that day, she went for a walk in the park. Police requested surveillance camera footage from the park and began an investigation. A family member provided valuable information about Nohema's daily walking route. During the investigation at Chautauqua Park, police discovered Nohema's body. The criminals had attempted to conceal it by covering it with a tarp and placing old iron bars over it. Forensic experts searched the scene for clues that could lead to a suspect, but unfortunately, they found none. The discovery of Nohema's body left locals terrified, worried that a dangerous man was on the loose. To increase security, public patrols were set up in the park. Police carefully examined the crime scene, suspecting that the killer might have returned. Meanwhile, an autopsy was underway. The forensic expert determined that Nohema had died from blunt force trauma to the head, indicating she had been brutally beaten, likely with a bat. It was hard to fathom who could commit such a horrific act against this kind and gentle woman. Those who knew her insisted that she had no enemies or anyone who would wish her harm. A school student suddenly contacted the police with information about two teenagers. The informant revealed that these teenagers were her classmates who had boasted about a murder on social media. The suspects were identified as 16-year-olds Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale. Even though their social media accounts had been deleted, the police managed to review their profiles, which raised several concerns. Police began interviewing students in Nohema's class, and multiple witnesses reported that on the day of her disappearance, she had argued with Willard. He claimed that she had unfairly given him low grades, which affected his overall grades. Willard initially asked Nohema to raise his grade. However, she believed that with more effort, he could have achieved better results on his own. Therefore, she refused his request. Students said Willard had never shown any signs of violence. He had never shown cruelty in the past, and no one could imagine him capable of committing this crime. He came from a respectable family, but according to some classmates, he had a grudge against his teacher, Nohema. The Willard stated that he had never received bad grades before joining Nohema's class and attributed his drop in academic performance to the teacher's perceived bias. However, other students disagreed, believing the teacher was fair and graded all students appropriately. Following this information, the officers decided to visit the Willard's home for further discussion. When the police arrived at Willard's home, he remained calm and confident throughout the conversation. However, when the conversation turned to the murder, he became angry and spoke disrespectfully about Nohema. Willard initially claimed that the teacher had intentionally given him a low grade and that he had no idea that her body had been discovered. He thought she had just been reported missing and was the subject of a search. However, when the police confronted him and revealed that Nohima had been murdered and her body had been found, all the evidence pointed to his involvement. Under pressure, Willard quickly admitted that he had been present at the attack on Nohima. He claimed that other masked men had attacked Nohima with baseball bats and that he had been forced to watch. They then forced him to load her body onto a cart in the park and take it near the cultural heritage site. Willard denied any role in the crime. At the same time, police were searching for Nohima's car, which was missing from both the school parking lot and the park. When questioned, Willard again spoke of the mysterious masked attackers. He said that after the attack, they forced him to drive Nohima's car and left him in a secluded area. However, Willard could not clarify who the masked individuals were, what their motive was for killing the teacher, or how they arrived at the crime scene. His testimony did not convince the police. Police also arrested Willard's friend, 16-year-old Jeremy. Jeremy gave a similar account and denied any involvement in the murder. During the investigation, they discovered a disturbing notebook belonging to Jeremy. After examining its contents, police determined that in the months leading up to the tragic incident, the two boys had been following Nohima and recording her actions. They recorded details such as what time she left school, how long she stayed in the parking lot, where she went, and other specifics. These notes revealed a significant part of her daily routine. She would go to the park alone after work, taking the same route every day. On November 2, Nohima went to the park as usual and was attacked by Willard and Jeremy. They struck Nohima several times in the head, causing her to fall and become unconscious. Willard and Jeremy then dragged her off the park trail, where they continued to beat Nohima until she died. They then covered Nohima's body with leaves and branches before going to Willard's house to get a garden cart. Along the way, they picked up some wooden planks to help hide the body. They returned to the scene, immobilized the body, and covered it with a tarp in the hopes that it would never be found. Around 4:00 p.m., witnesses saw Nohima's car parked near her home. Several people confirmed seeing two teenagers inside the car. Unfortunately, none of the witnesses were able to positively identify the suspect because they could not clearly see the occupants of the car. The car was only there for a few minutes before driving away. A friend of Jeremy's provided additional information. On the day of Nohima's disappearance, Willard and Jeremy had called their friend around 7:00 p.m. after leaving Nohima's car and asked him to pick them up on Glasgow Road. The young man met Willard and Jeremy there. He noticed that they seemed disheveled and nervous. Neither of them spoke during the entire ride home. The only thing he heard from them was that their car was stuck somewhere. He suspected that they were involved in something serious. He then drove Willard and Jeremy home and said goodbye. After gathering all the information, the police returned to Jeremy's home with a search warrant. The officers found bloody towels, blood-stained clothing, and hair that did not belong to Jeremy. They also recovered two bloody baseball bats from the home. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Nohima. More evidence quickly emerged. During interviews, several students admitted to seeing messages from Jeremy on messaging apps. In these messages, he detailed how he and a friend killed their homeroom teacher, Nohima. Jeremy explained that he was motivated by the belief that Nohima had unfairly graded their work. He went on to describe the baseball bat murder, how they transported the body, and the theft of their car, which they then abandoned. The police examined the phones of Jeremy and Willard and discovered that the two communicated with each other about the murder. Their messages included details about the motive, the planning process, the location of the Nohima's body, where her car was parked, and how they disposed of the evidence. It is clear that the murder was premeditated, not a spontaneous act. Willard and Jeremy tracked Nohema's movements, and on November 2, the day she left work and went to the park, Jeremy and Willard were there waiting for her. They had studied her schedule and knew she would be alone. Police found an abandoned car belonging to Nohema along the route they checked. Surveillance footage showed that on November 16, the car arrived at the park, the Nohema got out, and 42 minutes later, Jeremy and Willard approached the car and drove away. They were wearing the same clothes found at their home, which had blood on them. On the same day, Willard and Jeremy were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. There were aggravating factors, including intentional obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence. It is important to note that for this heinous crime, Willard and Jeremy were tried as adults. Although the defense requested that they be treated as juveniles, this request was denied. If convicted as adults, they would face life in prison with the possibility of parole due to their age. Initially, Willard and Jeremy wanted to be tried together, but Jeremy's attorney argued that Jeremy was not the instigator of the crime. He was named as an accomplice. Therefore, a separate trial was requested for him. Jeremy's attorney claimed that Willard was the mastermind behind the murder of Nohema. This led to a lengthy legal battle in which Willard and Jeremy attempted to blame each other for the crime. Therefore, it was decided to hold separate trials for the teenagers. The attorneys were successful in moving the trial to a different city to avoid potential bias. Jeremy's defense attorney claimed that he was an innocent young man who was negatively influenced by Willard. However, this argument has been dismissed when it was revealed that Jeremy had bragged about the murder in a text message the day after it occurred, describing his actions and showing no remorse. Jeremy was clearly an active participant in the crime. The lawyer argued that Jeremy was questioned without any adults present, which led him to give up his Miranda rights. These rights inform suspects of their right to remain silent and to have an attorney present during questioning. However, there was no evidence of coercion. Jeremy appeared relaxed during the interrogation and was even offered donuts and coffee. The pressure and intimidation that the lawyer mentioned did not happen during his time with the police. The trial for Jeremy was set for December 5, 2021, while Willard's trial was scheduled for August 21, 2022. On November 2, a hearing took place to confirm the trial's schedule, and Jeremy successfully postponed his trial. The defense team was busy preparing the case materials, and the Supreme Court was also involved. Willard's defense team requested a thorough investigation into the actions of police agencies. This investigation included reviewing police procedures and looking for any violations or inconsistencies. The defense claimed that the police had lied to obtain a search warrant. If they proved this, the lawyers could eliminate certain key pieces of evidence from the trial, preventing them from being presented to the jury during the upcoming hearings. The defense actually managed to block some of the data that the police found on the phone and computer. Attorneys tried to exclude any social media conversations and text messages that contained confessions about the murders. They claimed that Willard and Jeremy may have made up these stories or claimed responsibility for the crimes to gain attention from their peers. However, the defense's efforts were unsuccessful. During the trial, Willard's mother came to court to defend her son. She explained that when police approached her son on November 4, 2021, at approximately 5:30 p.m., they did not inform her of his possible involvement in the murder. She thought he was being questioned like any other student in Nohema's class, simply as a witness. Had she known that the police considered Willard a suspect, she would have made sure he had legal representation. She said the police visit took her by surprise. When she took Willard to the police station, she was in a hurry and accidentally took the wrong glasses. As a result, when she was asked to sign some papers there, she could not read what was on them. She told the police about her situation and refused to sign. The police assured her that it was just a formality to request permission to interrogate her son, so she signed without thinking. Now, she complained that she felt cheated. After all that had happened, she was not allowed to see her son because he had been arrested on suspicion of murdering Nohima. This situation made her extremely angry with the police's actions. Willard's mother contacted a friend who was a police officer and learned that her son, as a minor, should not be questioned without a lawyer. This information led her to suspect that both she and Willard were being tricked into expediting the case. She believed that Willard's statements were false confessions, coerced by the officers who had left him alone. This violated proper investigative procedures. The mother returned to the police station at approximately 7:30 a.m. and asked the senior inspector to stop speaking to her son, exercising Willard's legal right to do so. The police agreed to her request. However, official reports indicate that the questioning lasted a long time and did not end until 9:30 a.m. The prosecutor's office maintained that they did nothing wrong, explaining that state law allows for the questioning of minors if there is suspicion of their involvement in a crime, especially in serious cases. The police involved in the investigation denied the mother's allegations, claiming that they had clearly communicated the purpose of their visit and search, and that Willard had voluntarily consented to being questioned. However, the mother maintained that she would never have allowed Willard to be questioned without her presence and without an attorney. The prosecution said they had substantial and near-certainty evidence of Willard and Jeremy's guilt, which is why they proceeded confidently and transparently. Their actions were in compliance with state law. In Iowa, police can question minors without their parents present because the parents are likely suspects in the crime. However, if the parents are present, they have the right to request that the questioning stop or have an attorney present. The jury considered statements from Willard's parents and scheduled the trial for March 20, 2023. The defense then attempted to delay the trial again. The attorney argued that his schedule was too tight and asked that the case be postponed until later in the year. This delay was seen as disrespectful to the families of the Nohima who were seeking justice. It is unacceptable to them to assume that lawyers are too busy to adjourn the trial. Therefore, this excuse was not considered and the trial proceeded without further delay. The judge therefore set Willard's trial date for March 20, 2023. Jeremy is scheduled to appear in court on May 15, 2023. During this time, Nohima's social media page became a memorial page, with many students writing letters in honor of Nohima. The trial found that Willard was the one who delivered the first blow, which was not fatal. However, he then struck Nohima in the head several times. Realizing the severity of his actions, Willard apologized to Nohima's family and confessed to the crime. He was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. In July 2023, Willard Miller was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Jeremy Goodale was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. This tragedy resulted in the death not only of Nohima, but also of her ex-husband. Paul had been battling cancer, but after hearing the news of Nohima's death, he fell into a deep depression and stopped seeking treatment. Without medication, Paul could not control his disease and soon passed away. Detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Annie Kasperzak. Annie Kasperzak was born on January 10, 1997, into a family that lacked love. Her parents suffered from severe drug addiction and mental health issues. Therefore, Her living conditions since childhood have always been difficult. At a young age, she was removed from her parents' care and placed with a new family. However, things did not go smoothly, and her foster parents abandoned her just like her biological parents. As a result, by the age of 9, she had lived in 9 different families. Annie felt unwelcome and alone in the world, and her life in the orphanage had made her distrustful of people. Despite this, she held on to the hope of finding a loving family, one that would embrace her and provide the love she longed for. She dreamt of having a dad and mom who would care for her, accept her as their own. After Annie was returned by her 9th family, she went to an orphanage where she met Veronica Kasperzak. Veronica worked in Utah's social services, focused on finding suitable homes for children who had been cruelly treated. She was known as a very caring worker. For child and family protection services, she treated everyone she helped with genuine love. Upon meeting Annie, she was immediately touched by the girl's story. Annie told of being physically abused as a child. She lived in a cruel, unstable family, which had a great impact on her psychology. Veronica was moved to tears as she listened to her story. Veronica felt that life was unfair to she, and her tragedy touched Veronica's heart. As a result, Veronica and her relationship became close and warm. Veronica began visiting she regularly to provide her with emotional support. In January 2007, while 6 months pregnant, Veronica shared Annie's story with her husband, Dennis, who also longed for children. They decided to adopt Annie and welcome her into their family. Veronica and Dennis were kind and decent people, which allowed them to carry out their plans smoothly. Annie moved in with their family in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah. A few months later, Veronica gave birth to twins, both boys. By this time, all the bureaucratic hurdles related to Annie's adoption had been resolved, and she was warmly welcomed into the family. Even though this was her 10th time being adopted, she was full of enthusiasm and hope that the hardships of her life were behind her. She believed that now she would experience the love of her parents. Now that Annie had a home, wonderful parents, and 2 younger brothers, she embraced her role as a caring older sister. She happily babysat her younger siblings and helps her foster mother. Veronica, her brothers take up most of her free time, and she felt fulfilled in this new role. She tries to broaden their horizons and teach them new things every day. She sincerely loved her new brothers, and they returned her affection. Not long after, Annie experienced her first trip to the beach. It was a family holiday before Christmas, and Veronica and Dennis organized a wonderful celebration for their children. They spent most of their time opening gifts. But during this period, tensions began to arise within the family. Veronica and Dennis believed that having children would strengthen their relationship and help them learn new aspects of family life. Unfortunately, this was not the case. After a while, Veronica and Dennis's family had a falling out, which led to many difficulties. Veronica, who had witnessed similar situations in the past, feared that her family might fall apart again, even after their divorce. Dennis kept a good relationship with Veronica and remained involved in raising their children, including their adopted daughter, Annie. Fortunately, Annie's fears of returning to the orphanage did not come true. Meanwhile, Veronica started new relationships and eventually remarried. Her new partner, James, turned out to be a loving and caring husband and father. Just like Dennis, he quickly bonded with Annie and treated her as if she were his own daughter. Family affection and warmth gradually returned to their lives, and the family moved to a peaceful small town in Utah called Riverton. It was an ideal place to start a new life, but this story would not have a happy ending. James admits, Annie has special gifts. She could convince anyone to do anything, especially when it came to asking for gifts. One day, she saw a pair of red shoes in a store she really liked, and she begged James to buy them, and he couldn't refuse. At this time, 15 years old, Annie was in her first year at the academy. She was an outstanding student. Well liked by her teachers, she dreams of becoming a pediatrician. Due to her life experiences as a child, she always wanted to help other children. Veronica, her adoptive mother, was a guiding light for her. Transforming her life, she dreamed of emulating her mother. By dedicating her life to helping others, she even imagined adopting more children to study with them at home and support them during this time. Annie also had her first love. These feelings came on suddenly, and she embraced them wholeheartedly. On the evening of March 10, 2012, she stayed home to look after her younger brothers. Because Veronica and James had gone out for dinner, this was a romantic date that they had long awaited and planned. When Veronica and James returned home, everything appeared normal. The only thing Veronica noticed was that Annie had changed from her usual shorts into jeans, which she thought was likely due to the chill. However, she didn't think much of it. Eventually, she decided to take a shower, while Annie went into her room to listen to music. After she finished her shower, she went into the room to check on Annie, but found it empty. She couldn't find her daughter in the house. Worried, Veronica and James began looking for clues to see where Annie had gone. James carefully inspected her room and discovered a note under her pillow. In the note, she explained that she could no longer stay at home and had chosen to run away to California with her boyfriend. She admitted that she was pregnant and asked her parents not to look for her or report her missing to the police. This shocked the family. They could not believe that this was happening to them, so they continued to search for information. A few months before these incidents, Annie began having sex as the escape date approached. She noticed strange changes in her body. She felt weak, nauseous, and dizzy. Occasionally, she felt unwell for no apparent reason. Eventually, she thought she was pregnant, but when she took a pregnancy test, she got a negative result. The pregnancy test results show that Annie is not pregnant, which worries her because she has been mentally preparing to become a mother. Despite this, her decision to leave seemed strange and surprised her parents. Veronica and James, they had always provided her with love and support, and she appeared happy in their family. Often caring for her younger brothers, they felt her decision to leave was sudden and unprepared, as she had not shared with them her current situation or future plans. Naturally, her parents, Veronica and James, were concerned about her leaving. With her phone turned off, they quickly reached out to the police for help. Their biggest concern was who she ran away with. The police and her parents began contacting her close friends. While still attempting to reach her by phone, however, she ignored all their calls and messages. Annie's boyfriend was Darwin Christopher Bagshaw. They first met during a math class at school and quickly developed an attraction. Their secret relationship lasted a year and a half before it was discovered. It was surprising that Annie's parents were unaware of her feelings, as she had kept her romance hidden from them. According to her best friend, she was deeply infatuated with Darwin and feared losing him during their time together. Their group of friends changed, as Veronica and James were unaware of the new friends Annie made. Then, Veronica managed to reach Darwin, suspecting that he might have run away with her daughter, Annie. Everyone was surprised when Darwin declared that he did not know where Annie was. He revealed that their relationship had ended, and at the time, she disappeared. She was dating someone new named LJ. Veronica and James were completely unfamiliar with LJ. They had never heard of him, while Veronica was reaching out to Annie's friends and acquaintances to learn more about him. James managed to track Annie's mobile phone using an app. He monitored its movement in real time on a map for a while. The phone was moving quickly. It was clear that Annie was not driving, but after a while of observation, the signal suddenly stopped and then disappeared. Veronica and James are unable to contact Annie until now. She had ignored all their attempts to contact her. They hurried to the store, searched the supermarket, and asked everyone if they had seen her. They showed photos of her, but no one recognized her. After reviewing the security camera footage, they still couldn't find her. Veronica continued to call out to her daughter, but she still did not respond. They are very worried, but still hope that everything will be fine with their daughter and wish for her to come home. On March 11, the day after Annie went missing, a man contacted the police. He noticed blood on the riverbank and initially thought it was from a wounded wild animal. When he got closer, he saw another pool of blood and a red shoe nearby. He found this suspicious, so he called the police. Forensic experts arrived at the scene and collected samples for analysis. The results showed that the samples belonged to the same person, because the last location Annie was seen coincided with where the blood was found. Investigators became suspicious. A search operation was soon organized. Divers were mobilized to examine the river, while others searched the shoreline. A rescue helicopter was also dispatched a few kilometers north of where the shoe was found. A girl in a red dress was found floating face down in the water when the search party pulled her body from the water. They were unable to identify her. Her face was so badly disfigured that a forensic examination was needed to identify her. Most of her facial bones were crushed, and her nose was almost gone. The cause of death was determined to be multiple blows to the head with a blunt object, and that she had died the night she went missing. It was clear that she had died tragically after the body was discovered. Police reported through the media that they had found a girl of Asian descent with dark hair, believed to be under 20. When Veronica and James saw the news, they quickly recognized that it was their daughter, Annie. Although physical features do not match Annie's, but James recognized the red shoes he had given his daughter before she disappeared. Additionally, Veronica noted that the deceased wore a red dress that perfectly matched the one missing from their home. Veronica and James initially hoped it was just a coincidence and that the police had found another victim, but they felt uneasy. Identifying the body took time. It was determined that the victim wore braces and had her gallbladder removed, which matched Annie's details perfectly. Ultimately, dental records and DNA analysis confirmed that the body was Annie's at that moment. Any hope of Annie returning home vanished, and her parents were devastated afterward. Detectives went to Annie's home to search her room. They looked for any evidence that might help identify the criminal. During the search, they discovered a diary in which she wrote about her on-and-off relationship with Darwin on her 15th birthday. Annie expressed her desire to have children, yearning to be a young mother and care for her child. On March 1, 2012, she wrote that she was pregnant by Darwin. However, she later regretted it when a pregnancy test came back negative. She explained that she had been using birth control pills. The autopsy confirmed that she had never been pregnant. Further entries in her diary showed that she was wrong and just wanted to believe in her dream. She hoped this would help keep Darwin by her side, but he had no intention of building a real family with her. Veronica and James informed the police about their conversation with Darwin on March 14. Detectives spoke with Darwin. He was accompanied by his father, Spencer. He was aware of the rumors about Annie's pregnancy, but insisted he could not be the father. He believed that she had become pregnant by LJ, who was 17 at the time. He did not know LJ personally, but described LJ based on rumors, saying LJ was a man of bad reputation. However, he was unable to provide any further information to the police. The police also questioned Darwin about his whereabouts during Annie's disappearance. He claimed to have an alibi, stating he was at his grandmother Wilma's house. He mentioned that he briefly visited a friend that evening, but returned home when he found him not there. His grandmother verified his account. Additionally, he agreed to provide DNA samples from the clothes and shoes he wore on the night of the incident. When he handed over his sneakers, he mentioned that there might be some of Annie's blood on them because her nose was bleeding during their last meeting and stuck to his shoe. Her father was present and confirmed his statement. As a result, he was confirmed to have an alibi and was removed from the list of suspects. Spencer, Darwin's father, was asked to provide information about the relationship between Darwin and Annie. The detectives specifically wanted to know about someone named LJ. He did recall a message he received through social media back in November. That was sent from Annie's account, but signed by LJ at the time. He thought the message seemed odd. Additionally, he has heard disturbing rumors about LJ, suggesting that LJ may be involved in a gang or even have committed murder. On March 15, Spencer again contacts the police to report that a mysterious individual named LJ has threatened to kill his son, Darwin. Darwin informed he about the threat when he returned from work, prompting he to report it to the police immediately. At a press conference, the authorities shared the available information. They appealed to the public for any tips that could aid in capturing the criminal. Unfortunately, this did not advance the investigation. The situation changed when a witness named Joanna Franklin contacted the police. She was in custody for fraud, but claimed to know LJ. She provided a brief description of LJ, saying he was a short man, about 20 years old. She also said she had more information about the case, but would only share it if the police dropped the charges against her. Ultimately, the police were forced to accept her request. Joanna then revealed that on the night of the murder, Annie and LG went to Daniel Robert Ferry's house. Daniel had a criminal record and was at the time engaged in the distribution of illegal substances. She was present that evening and witnessed LG and Annie go to the bathroom together, where they had sex. Afterward, they returned. Daniel then approached Annie and asked her to have sex with him. She laughed, thinking it was a joke, but then refused him. In anger, he grabbed her head and slammed her against the wall, causing blood to splatter all over the wallpaper. She collapsed onto the carpet, blood flowing from her broken nose, mouth, and ears. Daniel did not stop there. He kicked her several times, threatening that no one was allowed to laugh at him. She lay unconscious. Joanna went to check her pulse and saw that she was still alive, but Joanna did nothing. Because Joanna was afraid, Joanna noticed that Annie was still on the floor, her face very pale, but she was still breathing. The other teenagers at the party believed she was dead and showed no concern for her well-being. LJ returned to the room and saw the bloody scene. Daniel explained that he had taught Annie a lesson for laughing at him. LJ reacted calmly to Daniel's actions, and they began discussing what to do with Annie's body. Joanna watched as they wrapped she in a large towel, loaded her into a car, and drove away. A few hours later, they returned without Annie. When asked about Annie's, they claimed they had gone swimming near the canyon, saying that she had regained consciousness but then fought with them and ran away. Joanna and the others realized this was a lie and understood they had disposed of her body. The police asked Joanna about Annie's clothing. Joanna described she as wearing a lot of red, shoes and a dress. Coincides with how she was discovered. To verify Joanna's statement, investigators went to the home of dealer Daniel. He denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he had not harassed or harmed anyone. Detectives obtained a search warrant for his house, anticipating they would find blood on the walls and carpet. However, they discovered that the wall Joanna mentioned had been recently painted, and the carpet was missing, according to police experience. It appeared that the house had been renovated in a suspicious manner. During a thorough examination, forensic scientists discovered stains on the floor that looked like blood. As they continued their investigation, they became increasingly convinced that Joanna was telling the truth. Daniel was arrested and brought in for questioning. Witness testimony confirmed that Daniel was indeed a gang member and had a criminal record for drug trafficking. During the interrogation, he was accompanied by his lawyer. He denied knowing LJ and Annie. Even when shown a photograph of her, he insisted he did not know her name and maintained that he did not kill her. Despite Daniel's convincing testimony, detectives still suspected his involvement in Annie's murder. The lab results from stains collected at his house revealed they were not blood, but sauce. Aside from Joanna's testimony, there was no evidence to prove his guilt, forcing the detectives to release him. Later, they discovered that, during this time, he committed another crime. He may have been involved in an attack and kidnapping that took place in a nearby city, raising the authorities' suspicions even further. To clarify Daniel's whereabouts, authorities examined location data from his phone. The data showed that on March 10, the day Annie was murdered, he was in another city. After months of searching for evidence, investigators could not connect him to the crime, leading to his removal from the suspect list. Ultimately, Daniel confessed to the kidnapping and assault of another person, which he committed with a friend around the same time as Annie's murder. Proving they could not have been in two places at once, this indicated that they were not involved in Annie's death. The police reinterrogated Joanna. She admitted that she had made up the story. She wanted revenge on Daniel and knew that on the night of Annie's murder, he had kidnapped someone else. Her accusation misled the police, diverting their focus and allowing the real culprit to evade justice. Her lie wasted over a year of police investigation. Additionally, there were no leads on LJ, who had vanished without a trace, tragically. The detective in charge of the case was killed while on duty, and the investigation was handed over to a new officer. Unfortunately, significant information was lost with the deceased detective. In this context, Annie's family felt deeply affected and decided to offer a reward for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the killer. A new investigator has begun to review all documents related to the case. He reread Annie's diary and noticed that a couple of months before her death, she had an intimate relationship with Darwin. Afterward, she had thought she might be pregnant, but that turned out to be a misunderstanding. It seemed that she wanted to use the child to keep Darwin with her, which could have been the motive for the murder. On the night of the murder, they had multiple calls with each other. That evening, her phone received 3 calls from an unknown number. The phone companies have been monitoring these calls and discovered that they came from Darwin's number. It seemed that Annie and Darwin had had an argument and were trying to mend their relationship over the phone. The police decide to reconsider Darwin's alibi, as he is the prime suspect and has a motive for the crime by tracking mobile calls. They discovered that his grandmother and father were lying. He was not with them that evening. They were only trying to corroborate his alibi and protect him. Furthermore, there was a lot of blood on his shoes, which made people even more suspicious of him. Meanwhile, his family seemed to be protecting him. After speaking with Darwin's father, Spencer, who was pressured by the detectives, he admitted that he had lied to the police 2 years ago upon reviewing messages between he and Darwin. They discover that Darwin asked him to create a false alibi to fool the police. The new investigator was surprised to learn that some friends referred to Darwin as LJ. The key piece of evidence against Darwin came from his cell phone location data. At the time of Annie's murder, it showed that he was at the riverbank where the body was found. This seemed to confirm that the case was finally solved. At the time, he was living with his mother in Colorado, prompting police to arrange an interview with him. When detectives approached him at the school, he appeared surprised. He refused to speak to them without a lawyer. He was extradited back to Utah in October 2014. Although he did not cooperate with the police, there was enough evidence to press charges against him, and his trial was set for March 2015, according to state law. Dennis was supposed to be tried as a minor, which would have allowed him to be released by the time he turned 21. However, this was not permissible given the seriousness of the crime. Therefore, the prosecution, with the backing of Annie's family, requested that he be tried as an adult. He was held in prison while awaiting trial. During this time, he confided in a fellow inmate, revealing the disturbing details of the murder. In his confession, Darwin explained that he had believed for a long time that Annie was pregnant. He was distressed at the thought of becoming a father at such a young age, especially since he had not yet completed school. To get out of this situation, he planned to kill Annie and suggested they meet by the river to discuss running away from home. She naively believed his lie when she arrived at their meeting place. She was dressed very beautifully. Darwin then attacked her, striking her in the face with a shovel multiple times. After she fell, he continued to hit her with the shovel. Finally, he placed the flat side of the shovel on her head and jumped on it until she no longer showed any signs of life. Experts confirmed that the injuries on she matched the actions described by Darwin. After Darwin confessed to the crime, the court decided to try him as an adult. Because his actions were so heinous, he was charged with first-degree murder. The defense lawyer argued that he did not understand his actions and felt remorse. However, Annie's family believed that he was just trying to gain sympathy to receive a lighter sentence. In the end, Darwin Christopher Bagshaw was sentenced to life in prison. With the possibility of parole after 15 years, he will be eligible for parole in 2034. Additionally, his father and grandmother faced charges of perjury and obstruction of justice, each receiving a 2 years prison sentence.